"We haven't eaten in 5 days," the widow whispered to a stranger in the rain, and he gave her bread, shelter, and eventually his last name. But when a man with a badge rode in claiming legal rights to her daughter, this Texas rancher had to choose: walk away from the fight or stand between a mother and the nightmare that hunted her across state lines. What happened next would either save a family or destroy the only home they'd ever known. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The storm had no mercy. It came howling across the Texas panhandle like something alive and furious, tearing at the canvas tarp Eleanor Briggs had stretched between the broken wagon wheel and a cottonwood stump. The fabric snapped and whipped in the wind, threatening to fly away entirely and leave them exposed to the deluge. Rain hammered down in sheets, turning the prairie into a churning sea of mud and wild grass that bent horizontal under the assault. Eleanor pressed herself against the wagon's splintered side, one arm wrapped tight around her daughter Mira's small, shivering body. The child's face was buried against her mother's chest, thin shoulders trembling with each rattling cough that tore through her. At 5 years old, Mira had already learned not to cry when things got bad, a lesson no child should have to master. But tonight, Eleanor could feel the silent tears soaking through her dress anyway. "Mama," Mira whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm's rage. "I'm cold." "I know, sweetheart. I know." Eleanor tightened her grip, trying to will warmth from her own body into her daughter's. But she had nothing left to give. The cold had seeped so deep into her bones that she'd stopped shivering an hour ago, a sign she recognized from the war winters, when men stopped shaking just before they stopped breathing entirely. 5 days. 5 days since they'd had anything resembling a real meal. The last of their cornmeal had run out somewhere in the Oklahoma Territory, where a trading post owner had looked at Eleanor's worn dress and empty purse and sent them away without so much as a kind word. She tried to forage, but the early spring prairie was still brown and barren, offering nothing but false hope and endless horizon. The wagon had broken 2 days after that, the front axle snapping on a hidden gully during a river crossing. Eleanor had managed to salvage some supplies before the whole thing tilted sideways into the mud: blankets, a few cooking implements, Mira's rag doll. But the wagon itself was finished. So was their horse, a gentle old mare named Bessie who'd gone lame trying to pull them free. Eleanor had been forced to make a choice that still haunted her, even as she knew it was mercy. One bullet, quick and clean, and then meat enough for 3 days if they could have kept a fire going. But they couldn't. The firewood they'd gathered was soaked through. Every match Eleanor struck sputtered and died in the wet air. The raw horse meat sat wrapped in canvas beneath the wagon, untouchable and useless. They might as well have been starving with a feast painted on a wall. Eleanor closed her eyes and tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. God had stopped listening somewhere between Missouri and here. Or maybe she'd stopped believing he was listening at all. Either way, the result was the same. They were alone on a prairie that stretched forever in every direction, with no help coming and no strength left to find it. "Mama?" Mira's voice was smaller now, fading at the edges. "Are we gonna die?" The question hit Eleanor like a fist. She opened her mouth to deny it, to offer some reassuring lie about how everything would be fine, how help was surely coming, how they just had to hold on a little longer. But the words caught in her throat. She'd never lied to Mira before. Not about anything important, and she wouldn't start now, even if the truth was unbearable. "I don't know, baby," she whispered instead, pressing her lips to Mira's damp hair. "I don't know." The wind screamed louder, and Eleanor felt the tarp give way with a sharp crack. The canvas flew off into the darkness like a ghost, leaving them completely exposed. Rain pounded down on them immediately, cold and relentless, soaking through what little dry clothing they had left. Mira cried out, a weak, frightened sound, and Eleanor pulled her tighter, curling her body around her daughter's as if she could become a shelter herself. But she was just bones and desperation now, held together by nothing but a mother's stubborn refusal to give up while her child still breathed. This is how it ends, Eleanor thought distantly, feeling a strange calm settle over her. Not with violence or cruelty or in any of the 100 ways I imagined Jonas would finish us. Just cold and hunger and a storm that doesn't even know we're here. It seemed almost peaceful in a terrible way. She closed her eyes and held Mira close, listening to the child's labored breathing mix with the rain's steady rhythm. Maybe sleep would come gently. Maybe they'd simply drift off together and never wake up. Maybe that was mercy too. But then, through the storm's chaos, through the wind and rain and thunder, a sound. Slow, steady, deliberate. Hooves. Eleanor's eyes snapped open. Her heart, which had been barely beating, suddenly hammered against her ribs. She held perfectly still, straining to hear over the storm. For a moment she thought she'd imagined it, a desperate hallucination conjured by a dying brain. But no, there it was again, the measured clop, clop, clop of a horse moving carefully through mud. "Mira," Eleanor breathed, her voice urgent. "Mira, wake up." The child stirred weakly against her chest. "Mama?" "Shh. Listen." They both went silent. The hoofbeats grew louder, closer, accompanied now by the creak of leather and the jingle of metal tack. Someone was out there. Someone was riding through this hellstorm, moving with the confidence of a man who knew exactly where he was going. Eleanor's mind raced through possibilities, each one darker than the last. It could be help, a rancher, a traveler, someone with food and shelter and kindness to spare. Or it could be danger of a different sort. Bandits, drifters, men who would see a defenseless woman and child as easy prey. Or worse, what if it's Jonas? The thought turned her blood to ice. What if he'd tracked them this far? What if he'd ridden through the storm specifically to find them at their weakest? She'd been so careful, covered their trail so well, but Jonas had always been relentless, obsessive. He'd sworn to take Mira, and men like him didn't make empty threats. "Mama, I'm scared," Mira whimpered. "I know, stay close to me." Eleanor's hand moved instinctively to the small knife she kept tucked in her boot. A pathetic weapon, barely more than a kitchen blade, but it was all she had. Her fingers closed around the handle, drawing strength from its solid weight. If this was Jonas, if he'd finally found them, she'd fight. God help her. She'd fight until her last breath. The hoofbeats stopped. Eleanor's breath caught. Whoever it was had reached them. She could hear the horse now, snorting and stamping just beyond the wagon's bulk. Leather creaked as the rider dismounted. Footsteps in the mud, coming closer. Eleanor pulled Mira behind her and rose to her knees, knife held low and ready. Rain streamed down her face, plastering her dark hair to her skull. She knew she must look like a drowned ghost, pale, gaunt, half wild, but she didn't care. Let him see. Let him know she wouldn't go quietly. A shadow appeared around the wagon's edge, tall, broad-shouldered, moving slow and careful, hands visible. Then he stepped into view, and Eleanor saw him clearly despite the darkness. Not Jonas. The man was older, maybe 40, with weather-worn features and a face that had seen too much sun and not enough comfort. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the rain, a long oilskin coat that gleamed with water, and boots caked in mud up to the knee. But it was his eyes that caught Eleanor's attention, steady, measuring, but not unkind. The eyes of a man who'd learned to assess situations quickly and act accordingly. He took one look at them, at Eleanor with her knife and her desperate protective stance, at Mira's small form shivering behind her mother, and something shifted in his expression. Not pity, exactly. Something deeper than that. Recognition, maybe, of suffering he understood too well. He raised both hands slowly, palms out, in a gesture of peace. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and rough, like gravel underfoot. "I'm not here to harm you." Eleanor didn't lower the knife. "Then what are you here for?" "Saw your wagon yesterday, broken on the creek bank. Figured someone might still be nearby. Might need help." He glanced up at the storming sky, water running off his hat brim in streams. "Didn't expect to find anyone still out here in this mess, though. That was foolish." "We had no choice," Eleanor said flatly. The man studied her for a long moment, and she watched something like understanding pass across his face. He'd seen desperation before, she realized, probably more than once. The war had scattered broken families across every state, leaving women and children stranded in places they'd never meant to go, with no resources and nowhere to turn. "You hurt?" he asked. No. The child? Eleanor hesitated. Mira's cough answered for her, a wet, rattling sound that seemed to echo in the storm. The man's jaw tightened. He reached slowly into his coat, and Eleanor tensed, her grip on the knife strengthening. But what he pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a bundle wrapped in oilcloth about the size of 2 fists. He took a step closer, then knelt in the mud, bringing himself to eye level with Eleanor. Even on his knees, he was still nearly as tall as she was standing, but the gesture was clear. He was making himself vulnerable, putting himself at a disadvantage, showing her he meant no threat. "Got some bread here," he said quietly, unwrapping the bundle. "Not much, and it's hard as rock, but it's food. You look like you could use some." Eleanor stared at the bread. It was dark, rough-hewn, the kind made with more grit than flour. But it was real, solid. Her stomach clenched so hard it hurt, and she realized with sudden, overwhelming clarity that she was going to take it. Pride be damned, caution be damned. Her daughter was starving, and here was food. "How much?" she whispered. The man looked confused. "How much what?" "How much do you want for it?" Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that might have been sorrow. "Nothing. It's yours. Both of you look half dead already. I'm not about to charge you for staying alive." Eleanor's vision blurred. She told herself it was just the rain, but she knew better. "We haven't eaten," she heard herself say, the words coming out in a broken whisper. "Not in 5 days. We have nothing. No money, no trade goods, nothing to—" "I know," the man said gently. "I can see that. Take the bread." He held it out, close enough that Eleanor could reach it without coming nearer to him. The gesture spoke volumes. He was giving her the choice, letting her keep her distance, respecting her fear even as he offered help. Slowly, Eleanor lowered the knife. Her hand shook as she reached out and took the bread. It was heavier than it looked, dense and substantial. Half a loaf, maybe more. Enough for several meals if they were careful. "Mira," she breathed, breaking off a piece. "Sweetheart, come here." The little girl emerged from behind her mother, eyes huge in her thin face. She stared at the bread as if it were something magical, something that couldn't possibly be real. Eleanor pressed the piece into her small hands. "Slow bites," she instructed, even as her own hands moved to break off another chunk for herself. "Chew it well. Your stomach's not used to food anymore." Mira nodded and bit into the bread with the careful reverence of a child receiving communion. Eleanor watched her for a moment, making sure she was actually eating, then allowed herself a bite of her own piece. The taste exploded across her tongue, grain and salt and something indefinably wonderful that might have just been sustenance itself. It was the best thing she'd ever eaten. She forced herself to chew slowly, to let her shrunken stomach adjust, even though every instinct screamed at her to devour the whole portion in seconds. When she looked up again, the man was still kneeling in the mud, watching them with an expression that was hard to read. Not satisfaction, exactly. Something more complex than that. Maybe relief. Maybe just the quiet acknowledgement of a small mercy in a merciless world. "Thank you," Eleanor managed around her mouthful. The words felt inadequate, too small for what he'd done, but they were all she had. The man nodded once. "You got anywhere to go?" Eleanor's hand instinctively tightened on Mira's shoulder. "We're heading west." "West is a big direction. You got family out there? Someone expecting you?" She hesitated, weighing truth against safety. But something in his steady gaze made her answer honestly. "No, no family, just west." "Running from something," he said. It wasn't a question. Eleanor met his eyes directly. "From someone. And I won't go back, no matter what." She waited for him to press, to ask questions, to demand explanations she couldn't give without putting them in more danger. But he just nodded, as if that answer told him everything he needed to know. "Fair enough." He stood, brushing mud from his knees with one hand. "You can't stay out here, though. That child's got the wet lung sound. I know it from the war. She needs to be somewhere dry and warm, and she needs it soon, or she won't make it another day." Eleanor's chest tightened. She knew he was right. She'd been trying not to think about how Mira's cough had worsened over the past 2 days, how her breathing had grown more labored, how the child barely had strength to stand anymore. Pneumonia. That's what it sounded like. And out here, with no medicine and no shelter, pneumonia was a death sentence. I don't, Eleanor's voice cracked. I don't have money for a doctor, or a room, or anything. Didn't ask for money. The man turned, gesturing toward where his horse waited in the darkness. My place is about an hour's ride northeast. It's not much, but it's got a roof that doesn't leak, a stove that works, and room enough for 2 more. You're welcome to it until the child's well and you can figure out your next move. Eleanor stared at him, trying to process the offer. Strangers didn't do this. Men didn't offer shelter to unknown women without expecting something in return. Every instinct she'd developed over the past year screamed at her to refuse, to thank him politely and send him on his way, to trust no one and nothing except her own judgment. But then Mira coughed again, and Eleanor felt the child sway against her, barely able to stand. Why? Eleanor asked hoarsely. Why would you help us? The man was quiet for a moment, staring out at the rain-soaked prairie. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, touched by something old and painful. Because 10 years ago, I came home from the war and found my house burned, my land taken, and my wife's grave fresh in the churchyard. She died of fever while I was gone, and there'd been nobody to help her, nobody to bring her water or bread or kindness. He looked back at Eleanor and his eyes were dark with old grief. I can't fix that, can't undo it, but I can make sure it doesn't happen to someone else's wife and daughter. Not if I can prevent it. Eleanor felt something break open in her chest, some locked chamber where she'd been keeping all her fear and exhaustion and desperate hope. She wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her independence, her control, her ability to keep running without owing anyone anything, but Mira needed more than she could give alone. All right, she whispered. All right, we'll come. The man nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. Name's Calder Boone. I run a cattle ranch about 10 miles from here. Small operation, just me and a few hands. You'll be safe there. Eleanor Briggs, and this is Mira. Calder touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, then moved to his horse, a tall roan gelding that stood patient in the rain. He untied a bedroll from behind the saddle and brought it over, along with a larger piece of oilcloth. Can either of you ride? He asked. Eleanor shook her head. She'd grown up in St. Louis, where horses were for pulling carriages, not for riding. Everything she knew about survival on the frontier had been learned in the past year, cobbled together from necessity and desperation. All right then, I'll walk. You and the girl can share the saddle. It'll be cramped, but it'll keep you out of the mud. He spread the oilcloth over them both like a massive cloak, tucking it carefully around Mira's small shoulders. This'll help keep the rain off. He lifted Mira first, settling her into the saddle with surprising gentleness for a man his size. Then he offered Eleanor his hand. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His palm was rough with calluses, his grip strong and steady. He helped her up behind Mira, then arranged the oilcloth over them both. Hold tight to the horn, he instructed. I'll lead him slow. We won't go faster than walking pace. Eleanor wrapped one arm around Mira and gripped the saddle horn with her other hand. The horse shifted beneath them, adjusting to the weight, but remained steady. Calder took up the reins and started walking, leading them away from the broken wagon and into the storm. The journey was a blur of darkness and rain. Eleanor lost track of time, focusing only on keeping Mira upright and warm beneath the oilcloth. The child had stopped coughing, not because she was better, but because she'd slipped into an exhausted half-sleep, her small body finally giving up the fight to stay conscious. Calder walked ahead of them, steady and unhurried, never looking back but always seeming to know when the horse needed a moment to pick through difficult terrain. He moved like a man who'd walked this land so many times he could navigate it blind, reading the prairie through his boots and bones. Finally, hours later, or maybe just minutes, Eleanor couldn't tell anymore. Shapes emerged from the darkness. Buildings. A house, a barn, a few smaller structures that might have been storage sheds or bunkhouses. The ranch. It was small, as Calder had promised. Not the sprawling operation she'd seen from train windows while fleeing Missouri, but something more modest. A single-story house with a covered porch, a barn that looked solid but weathered, and a few split-rail corrals barely visible in the rain. But what mattered was that the house had light glowing in one window, and smoke rising from a chimney despite the storm. Warmth, shelter, safety. Calder led them to the porch, then helped Eleanor down first before taking Mira into his own arms. The child barely stirred, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Front door's open," he said. Go on in. I'll get the horse settled and be right behind you." Eleanor climbed the porch steps on legs that barely remembered how to work. She pushed open the door and stepped into a warmth so sudden and complete it almost made her dizzy. The interior was simple but clean. One main room serving as kitchen and living space, with a black iron stove radiating heat in one corner and a scarred wooden table surrounded by mismatched chairs. A doorway led to what was probably a bedroom. The walls were bare except for a few hooks holding coats and tools, and the furniture looked handmade, functional rather than decorative. But it was warm and dry and safe. Eleanor stood in the middle of the room, dripping rain onto the floorboards, and felt the last of her strength give way. She'd made it. Against all odds, against every terrible possibility, she'd kept Mira alive long enough to find help. The realization hit her so hard she had to grab the edge of the table to keep from falling. The door opened again, and Calder came in carrying Mira like she weighed nothing at all. He kicked the door shut against the storm, then moved immediately toward the bedroom. "Got a bed in here?" he called over his shoulder. "It's dry and the blankets are clean. Let's get her settled." Eleanor followed him into a small room containing a bed, a chest of drawers, and little else. Calder laid Mira down gently, then stepped back to let Eleanor take over. She pulled off Mira's soaked clothes with trembling hands, wrapping her daughter in the thick wool blankets that smelled of soap and summer sun. "There's shirts in the drawer that'll do for night clothes," Calder said from the doorway. "They'll be too big, but they're warm. You should change too. You're soaked through." Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. Calder left, pulling the door halfway closed to give them privacy. She found the shirts, men's work shirts, flannel and soft from many washings, and dressed Mira in one before stripping off her own wet clothes and pulling another over her head. It hung to her knees like a dress, but it was dry and warm, and that was all that mattered. When she emerged from the bedroom, Calder was stoking the fire in the stove, building it up to a fierce heat. He'd removed his wet coat and hat, revealing sandy brown hair and the lean, work-hardened build of a man who made his living with his hands. "Coffee's on," he said without turning around. "Should be ready in a few minutes. You drink coffee?" "Yes." Eleanor's voice came out rough as sandpaper. "Thank you for everything. I don't know how to—" "Don't!" Calder straightened, facing her. His expression was serious but not unkind. "You don't owe me anything except the truth about one thing. How much trouble are you in? Because if someone's hunting you, I need to know what I'm stepping into." Eleanor wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm shirt. This was the moment she'd been dreading. The moment when she'd have to decide how much to tell, how much to trust this stranger who'd shown them more kindness in one night than they'd seen in a year of running. She took a breath and chose honesty. "My husband died 14 months ago," she said quietly. "Killed in a factory accident in St. Louis. His brother Jonas showed up at the funeral with a lawyer and papers claiming guardianship of Mira. Said I was unfit, said I couldn't provide for her properly. He had a judge in his pocket and money for bribes, and I knew if I stayed, he'd take her from me." "Why would he want to do that?" Calder asked. Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. "My husband inherited a trust from his father, not a fortune, but enough to matter. It was supposed to go to Mira when she turns 18. Jonas couldn't touch it as long as I had custody, but if he could prove me unfit, get himself named guardian instead." She let the implication hang in the air. "He'd control the money," Calder finished, "and Mira along with it. Jonas isn't a good man, Mr. Boone. He drinks, he gambles. He has a temper that turns violent when he doesn't get his way. My husband kept him at arm's length for years, but now—" She swallowed hard. "Now there's nothing standing between him and what he wants except me. So I took Mira and I ran. We've been moving ever since, trying to get far enough away that he can't find us." Calder was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then, "Does he know you came west?" "I don't think so. I was careful. Bought tickets under a false name, avoided anyone who might recognize us, stuck to small towns and back roads." Eleanor met his eyes. "But Jonas is stubborn, and he has resources. It's only a matter of time before he picks up our trail. And when he does, I'll run again. Keep running until Mira's old enough that no court can take her from me, or until... She didn't finish the sentence. Until what? Until Jonas gave up? Until they ran out of places to hide? Until they died on some lonely stretch of prairie like they'd almost done tonight? Calder crossed to the stove and poured 2 cups of coffee, black and steaming. He pressed one into Eleanor's hands and took a long drink from his own. You can stay here as long as you need, he said finally. Get your strength back. Let the child heal. After that, we'll figure out your next move together. But Eleanor? He waited until she looked at him. You're not alone anymore. Understand? Whatever happens, you're not facing it alone. Eleanor's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to maintain the walls she'd built around herself and Mira, to refuse this kindness before it could turn into something that hurt them. But she was so tired, so desperately, bone-deep tired of being strong and vigilant and afraid every single moment. All right, she whispered. All right. They drank their coffee in silence, listening to the storm rage outside and the fire crackle in the stove. And for the first time in longer than Eleanor could remember, she let herself believe just for this one night that maybe, just maybe, they'd finally found a place to rest. Eleanor woke to the smell of bacon frying and sunlight streaming through an unfamiliar window. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The softness of the mattress beneath her, the warmth of clean blankets, the absence of fear pressing down on her chest. Then memory rushed back. The storm, the stranger, the ranch. Calder Boone. She sat up quickly, her heart lurching. Mira? Right here, Mama. The small voice came from across the room, where Mira sat curled in a wooden rocking chair that was far too big for her. She was wrapped in a quilt, her dark hair still tangled from sleep, but her eyes were brighter than they'd been in days. Mr. Calder said to let you sleep. He's making breakfast. Eleanor pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her pulse slow back to normal. Sunlight. Mira was sitting up, talking, looking almost like herself again. The panic that had become her constant companion eased just slightly. How do you feel, sweetheart? Better? Mira coughed, but it was softer now, less of that terrible wet rattle that had terrified Eleanor in the storm. My chest still hurts, but Mr. Calder gave me honey and hot water, and it helped. Eleanor stood, smoothing down the oversized flannel shirt she'd slept in, suddenly aware of how exposed she must look. Her dress from yesterday still hung over a chair by the window, stiff with dried mud, but at least no longer soaking wet. She dressed quickly, her fingers clumsy with the buttons. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Calder at the stove, efficiently managing a skillet of bacon and a pot of what looked like cornmeal mush. He'd changed into clean clothes, a faded blue work shirt and canvas trousers held up with leather suspenders, and his hair was still damp, as if he'd washed at the pump outside. Morning light through the window caught the silver threading through the brown at his temples. He glanced up as she entered. Coffee's still hot. Cups are on the shelf there. Thank you. Eleanor poured herself a cup with hands that still wanted to shake. The normalcy of it, morning, coffee, breakfast, felt almost surreal after so many months of running and hiding and barely surviving. You didn't have to do all this. Had to eat anyway. Not much extra work to make enough for 3. He used a fork to flip the bacon, then stirred the mush. Child's cough sounds better this morning. The honey helped. That was kind of you. Had a mare once that got the wet lung. Honey and steam kept her going till she could heal proper. Figured it might work on a little girl, too. He pulled the skillet off the heat. Breakfast is ready, if you want to get Mira. They ate at the scarred wooden table, and Eleanor had to force herself not to devour everything in front of her. The bacon was salty and perfect, the cornmeal mush filling in a way that made her realize just how empty she'd been. Mira ate slowly, carefully, but she finished her entire portion, the first full meal she'd managed in over a week. Calder ate without much conversation, but his silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. He had the manner of a man used to his own company, who didn't feel the need to fill every moment with words. When he did speak, it was practical, straightforward. I'll need to ride out and check the south pasture this morning. Lost some fence in that storm, and I've got cattle that'll wander if they find the gap. You're welcome to stay here. Rest up. There's more firewood on the porch if you need it, and the pump's just outside if you want to wash up proper. Eleanor nodded, trying not to feel like a burden. Is there anything I can do? To help, I mean. I'm not much good with ranch work, but I can clean or mend things or... You can rest, Calder interrupted gently but firmly. That child needs looking after, and you look like you haven't slept a full night in months. Everything else can wait. He was right, of course. Eleanor knew it even as some stubborn part of her resisted accepting more charity. But before she could argue, Calder stood and carried his empty plate to a wash basin by the window. I'll be back before dark. There's bread in the tin there, and some preserves in the cold box out back if you get hungry. Don't answer the door if anyone comes calling. Not likely, but just in case. The casual warning sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. She hadn't even thought about what she'd do if Jonas somehow tracked them here, if he showed up while Calder was gone. Do you think... No, Calder said, reading her fear. I don't think anyone's coming, but I also don't take chances with other people's safety. So just stay inside, keep the door latched, and I'll be back soon enough. He gathered a worn leather satchel from a hook by the door, checked that his hat was secure, and paused at the threshold. You did good, Eleanor. Getting this far, keeping your daughter alive, that took strength most people don't have. You should know that. Before she could respond, he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Eleanor heard his footsteps across the porch, then the sound of a horse being led from the barn. She moved to the window and watched him ride out, sitting easy in the saddle as the morning sun turned the wet prairie into a sea of diamonds. Mira came to stand beside her, small hand slipping into Eleanor's. I like him, Mama. He's nice. Yes, Eleanor said softly. He is. Are we going to stay here? The question was so simple, so full of hope, that it broke something in Eleanor's chest. For a little while, sweetheart. Just until you're well. And then we have to run again? Eleanor looked down at her daughter's upturned face and saw too much understanding there, too much weariness for a 5-year-old. Mira had learned not to get attached to places or people, not to believe in permanence or safety. She'd learned that home was something that could be torn away without warning, that every moment of peace was just borrowed time before the next desperate flight. What kind of childhood was that? I don't know, Eleanor admitted, because she wouldn't lie. We'll see. The day passed quietly. Eleanor did wash up at the pump, scrubbing away layers of dirt and fear until her skin felt raw but clean. She heated water on the stove and helped Mira bathe in a large tin tub they found in the barn, washing the child's hair until it shone like dark silk in the sunlight streaming through the window. Mira's cough persisted, but it was definitely improving. Less frequent, less desperate. In the afternoon, while Mira napped wrapped in quilts by the warm stove, Eleanor explored the house more thoroughly. It was a bachelor's space, clearly, functional, but without decoration or softness. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floors, no photographs or paintings on the walls. The furniture was all handmade, sturdy but rough. The bedroom held only the bed, the dresser, and a single chair. No woman had lived here in a long time, if ever. But it was clean, organized. The few dishes were washed and put away, the floors swept, everything in its place. Calder Boone might live alone, but he lived with discipline and care. It spoke to something in his character, a refusal to let hardship turn him slovenly or careless. Eleanor found herself studying the small details. A pair of well-oiled boots by the door, a Bible on a shelf with a worn leather cover, a photograph in a simple frame tucked almost out of sight on the mantel. She picked up the photograph carefully. It showed a younger Calder, maybe in his late 20s, standing beside a woman with kind eyes and dark hair swept up under a bonnet. His wife, Eleanor realized, the one he'd mentioned, who died while he was away at war. The woman in the photograph was smiling, one hand resting on Calder's arm, and there was something so tender in the way they stood together that Eleanor felt like an intruder just looking at it. This was private grief, carefully preserved. She set the frame back exactly where she'd found it and turned away. By the time Calder returned, the sun was low and painting the western sky in shades of crimson and gold. Eleanor heard him before she saw him, the sound of the barn door opening, the low murmur of his voice talking to his horse. She watched from the window as he unsaddled the roan, brushed it down with practiced efficiency, and made sure it had feed and water before heading to the house. He came in looking tired but satisfied, mud caked on his boots and a tear in his shirt sleeve. Fences mended, only lost 2 head through the gap, and I got them back before they could wander far. Should I heat water for washing? Eleanor asked. There's still some warm on the stove. Calder looked surprised, as if he wasn't used to anyone anticipating his needs. That'd be appreciated, yes. Eleanor poured hot water into a basin and set it on the table with a clean rag she'd found hanging by the pump. Calder washed his hands and face, scrubbing away the day's dirt with the thoroughness of a man who understood the value of clean water. When he was done, he sat heavily in one of the chairs and looked at Mira, who was setting the table with careful concentration. You're looking stronger, little one. Mira smiled shyly. Mama says I have to rest, but I feel better. Your mama's a smart woman. You listen to her. He glanced at Eleanor. How was she today? Any fever? No fever. The cough is less and she kept her food down. I think the worst has passed. Good. Calder stood and moved to the cold box, pulling out wrapped parcels. I'll make supper. You two have done enough today. Mr. Boone, I can— Calder, he interrupted. Just Calder, and you'll sit. You're still recovering yourself, even if you won't admit it. Eleanor wanted to argue, but the exhaustion she'd been holding at bay suddenly crashed over her. She sat, watching as Calder moved around his kitchen with easy competence. He had the fluid efficiency of someone who'd been taking care of himself for a long time, who didn't need recipes or guidance to produce a simple but solid meal. They ate together again, salt pork and beans, with biscuits that Calder admitted came from a batch his ranch hand's wife had made and sent over. The food was plain but plentiful, and Eleanor felt some of the hollow emptiness inside her begin to fill with something other than fear. Over the next few days, a pattern emerged. Calder would rise before dawn, start the fire and the coffee, then head out to work his land. Eleanor would care for Mira, do what small tasks she could around the house, and wait for evening when Calder would return tired but steady. They'd share meals, sparse conversation, and the comfortable silence of people learning to exist in the same space. Eleanor found herself studying Calder when he wasn't looking. He was a man of routines and quiet competence, someone who did what needed doing without complaint or expectation of praise. He never asked her for anything, never pushed for information she didn't volunteer, never made her feel like she owed him more than simple courtesy. It was so different from every other man she'd known, different from her husband, who'd been kind but weak, unable to stand up to his brother's bullying. Different from Jonas, who demanded and took and broke things just to prove he could. Calder Boone asked for nothing, and somehow that made Eleanor want to give him everything. On the third evening, after Mira had gone to bed, Eleanor found Calder on the porch, mending a bridle by lamplight. The spring night was cool but clear, full of stars that seemed close enough to touch. She brought him a cup of coffee and sat in the chair beside his, gathering her courage. I've been thinking about what comes next, she said quietly, when Mira's fully well. Calder's hands didn't pause in their work. And? I have a plan. There's a town in California, Fresno, where my husband's cousin lives. We've never met, but she wrote after the funeral, said if I ever needed help, I could come there. It's far enough that Jonas won't think to look, and California's far enough from Missouri that— That's a long way to travel alone with a child, Calder interrupted, especially with someone hunting you. I know. But what choice do I have? I can't stay here forever. You have your own life, your own work. We're already imposing too much. You're not imposing. Calder set down the bridle and looked at her directly. And I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but California's 3, maybe 4 weeks of hard travel from here, and you'd have to cross territory where a woman alone with a child is going to draw attention. Questions. The kind of attention that gets back to people you don't want finding you. Eleanor felt her throat tighten. Then what do you suggest? That I stay here and wait for Jonas to track us down? Because he will, eventually. He's got money and time and the kind of vindictive patience that doesn't quit. No. Calder picked up his coffee, took a long drink. I'm suggesting you stay here and let me help you figure out something better than running blind. You said Jonas has legal papers claiming guardianship, right? That he's got a judge in his pocket? Yes? Then the running won't ever stop. Not really. Because even if you make it to California, even if you hide there for years, those papers still exist. And the day he finds you, and men like that always find you eventually, he'll have the law on his side. You'll have nothing. The The truth of it hit Eleanor like a fist. She'd been so focused on distance, on putting miles between herself and Jonas, that she hadn't let herself think about the deeper problem, the legal problem. Jonas didn't just want Mira. He had a piece of paper saying she belonged to him. Running wouldn't change that. "What do you think I should do?" she asked, hating the weakness in her voice. Calder was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark prairie. When he spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "You need to change the situation. Make those papers meaningless." "How?" "By making sure Mira has a legal guardian who can't be challenged, someone with standing and resources, someone Jonas can't push around or bribe away." Eleanor's heart started beating faster. "I don't know anyone like that." "You do now." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Eleanor stared at Calder, trying to understand what he was offering. "You?" "Marriage," Calder said bluntly. "On paper, at least. Make it legal, make it official, and make it stick. If you're married, Jonas can't claim you're unfit. If I legally adopt Mira as my daughter, his guardianship papers become worthless. He'd have to fight me in court, and I've got land, a reputation in this county, and friends who'd vouch for me. It wouldn't be easy for him." Eleanor couldn't breathe. Marriage, legal adoption. The solution was so simple and so impossible at the same time. "You don't want—" "I'm offering a legal arrangement," Calder interrupted. "Not asking you to be anything you don't want to be. We'd be married in name for the protection it gives you and Mira. You'd have your own room, your own space. I wouldn't expect—" He cleared his throat. "I wouldn't expect anything beyond what you're willing to give. But you'd be safe. Both of you would be safe. And Jonas would have to go through me to get to either of you." "Why?" Eleanor whispered. "Why would you do this?" Calder looked at her then, and his eyes held an old pain she recognized. "Because I couldn't save my wife when she needed me. Because I came home to nothing but a grave and regret. Because I know what it's like to lose everything, and I'll be damned if I stand by and let it happen to someone else when I could prevent it." Eleanor felt tears burn her eyes. It was too much, too generous, too dangerous for him, too impossibly kind. "If Jonas finds out, he'll make trouble for you. He has connections, money. He could hurt you." "Let him try." There was steel in Calder's voice now, something hard and unyielding. "I didn't survive 4 years of war by being easy to push around, and I didn't build this ranch by backing down from a fight. Calder, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." He stood, picking up the mended bridle. "Think about it. I'm not rushing you for an answer. But Eleanor?" He waited until she looked up at him. "You don't have to run anymore. Not if you don't want to." He went inside, leaving Eleanor alone on the porch with her thoughts spinning. Marriage. Safety. A life that wasn't just survival. It seemed impossible. It seemed like a dream she didn't dare believe in. But as she sat under the vast Texas stars listening to the night sounds of the prairie, Eleanor let herself imagine it. Imagine staying. Imagine Mira growing up here, healthy and happy, learning to ride horses and collect eggs and live without fear. Imagine having a partner, even just on paper, who stood between her and the darkness. It was a dangerous thing to hope for. But God help her, she wanted it. The next morning, Eleanor woke to find Calder already gone to work, a fresh pot of coffee on the stove and a note on the table in rough handwriting. "Take your time, no pressure. No, CB." She spent the day watching Mira, who was strong enough now to play outside under Eleanor's supervision, chasing butterflies through the wet grass and laughing with a lightness Eleanor had feared was lost forever. The sound of her daughter's laughter made the decision easier. When Calder came home that evening, Eleanor was waiting on the porch. He dismounted slowly, reading something in her posture. "I have conditions," Eleanor said before he could speak. Calder nodded. "All right." "Mira comes first. Always. In every decision, in every choice, her welfare is the priority." "Agreed. I'll contribute to the household. I can't do ranch work, but I can cook, clean, manage accounts. I won't be dead weight." "Never thought you would be. And if I ever want to leave, if this arrangement doesn't work, or if things change, you let us go. No arguments, no trying to keep us here against our will." Calder's expression was serious. "You have my word. This isn't a cage, Eleanor. It's shelter. If you want to leave, you leave. Eleanor took a breath. Then, yes, I'll marry you. Something shifted in Calder's face. Not quite relief, but something close to it. He climbed the porch steps and stood before her, close enough that she could see the silver stubble on his jaw, the lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into the sun. I'll ride to town tomorrow and make arrangements with the pastor. We'll need witnesses. I can ask Tom Fairfield from the neighboring ranch and his wife. They're good people, trustworthy. How quickly can it be done? A week, maybe less. Texas doesn't have much waiting period for weddings, and Pastor Matthews isn't one for ceremony. Calder paused. Are you sure about this, Eleanor? Once we do it, once it's legal, Jonas will know. He'll come looking. I know. Eleanor straightened her spine. But I'm done running. Let him come. This time I'll have someone standing beside me. Calder extended his hand, formal and old-fashioned. Eleanor took it, feeling the callous strength of his palm against hers. They shook, sealing a bargain that was part desperation, part hope, and entirely uncertain. Partners, then, Calder said. Partners, Eleanor echoed. The week that followed was strange and dreamlike. Calder rode to town and returned with news that the wedding was set for Saturday morning. He brought fabric for Eleanor to make a simple dress, nothing fancy, just blue cotton that matched her eyes, and wooden blocks for Mira to play with. He introduced them to Tom and Martha Fairfield, a weathered couple from the ranch 3 miles north, who looked at Eleanor with knowing kindness and asked no uncomfortable questions. Martha took Eleanor aside on Thursday while the men discussed cattle prices. I won't pry, she said in her direct way, but I'll tell you this. Calder Boone is the most decent man I've ever known. Whatever your reasons for marrying him, you could do a lot worse. I know, Eleanor said softly. I'm grateful. Grateful's a start, but honey, if you're going to make a life here, you'll need more than gratitude. You'll need trust, and that takes time. Martha squeezed her hand. Give it time, both of you. Things have a way of working out if you let them. Friday night, the night before the wedding, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She lay in the bed that would soon be permanently hers, staring at the ceiling and trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. What if Jonas found them anyway? What if Calder regretted his decision? What if she was bringing danger down on a good man's head just by being here? A soft knock on the door interrupted her spiral. Eleanor, you awake? She sat up. Yes? The door cracked open, and Calder stood silhouetted in the lamplight from the main room. Can't sleep either? No. He stepped inside, keeping a respectful distance, and leaned against the wall. Having second thoughts? 1,000 of them. That's fair. He was quiet for a moment. I won't pretend this is a normal situation, or that I know exactly what I'm doing, but I meant what I said. You'll be safe here, both of you. That's a promise I can keep. Eleanor pulled the quilt closer around her shoulders. What if Jonas brings trouble? What if he... Then we'll handle it, together. Calder's voice was steady, certain. Eleanor, I've faced worse than one angry man with legal papers. I'll face this too. And so will you. You're stronger than you think. I don't feel strong. Strength isn't about feeling it. It's about doing what needs doing anyway. He straightened. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's a big day. After he left, Eleanor lay back down, but this time the panic had eased. She wasn't alone anymore. Whatever came next, she'd have someone standing between her and the darkness. It wasn't love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was something. It was enough. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright. Eleanor dressed in the blue cotton dress she'd sewn, simple but clean, and braided her hair in a crown around her head. Mira wore a white pinafore that Martha had brought over, and bounced with excitement she didn't fully understand. The ceremony was brief and practical, held in the small chapel in town with Tom and Martha as witnesses. Pastor Matthews asked the required questions, received the required answers, and pronounced them man and wife with a solemnity that made it feel real. Calder slipped a simple gold band onto Eleanor's finger. His mother's, he said quietly. The only thing of value he had left from before the war. When the pastor said he could kiss his bride, Calder looked at Eleanor with a question in his eyes. She nodded once, and he pressed a chaste kiss to her forehead, respectful, proper, and somehow more intimate than if he'd kissed her mouth. After the ceremony, while Calder spoke with Pastor Matthews about filing the marriage certificate, Eleanor stepped outside with Mira into the spring sunshine. The child tugged on her mother's skirt. "Mama, are we Mrs. Boone now?" Eleanor looked down at the gold band on her finger, catching the light. "Yes, sweetheart. We're Mrs. Boone now." "Does that mean Mr. Calder is my papa?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. She knelt down to Mira's level, smoothing her daughter's dark hair. "Would you like him to be?" Mira considered this with the seriousness only a child could bring to such a question. "He's nice, and he gave me honey when I was sick, and he makes Mama smile." She nodded decisively. "Yes, I think he should be my papa." Eleanor felt her throat close with emotion. "Then we'll ask him. But Mira, you remember your first papa, don't you? Your real papa?" "Yes." Mira's face was solemn. "But real papa went to heaven, and Mr. Calder is here. Can I have two papas, one in heaven and one here?" "Yes, baby, you can have two papas." When Calder emerged from the chapel, Eleanor told him what Mira had said. His face went still, something vulnerable flickering across it before he carefully composed himself. He knelt in front of Mira, putting himself at eye level with the small girl. "Mira, if I'm going to be your papa, I need to ask you something important. Can I do that?" Mira nodded seriously. "Being a papa is a big job. It means I'll teach you things and keep you safe and help your mama take care of you. It means when you're scared, you can come to me. When you're happy, you can tell me. And when you grow up, I'll be the one who stands beside you and is proud of who you become." His voice was rough with emotion. "Do you think I could do that? Be that person for you?" Mira didn't hesitate. She threw her small arms around Calder's neck and held on tight. "Yes, Papa Calder." Eleanor watched Calder's face as he hugged her daughter back, saw him close his eyes against the sudden shine of tears. He held Mira gently, as if she were something precious and breakable, and when he finally pulled back, there was a fierceness in his expression that hadn't been there before. "Then I'll spend every day of my life earning that," he said quietly. They rode back to the ranch as a family, Eleanor beside Calder on the wagon seat, Mira between them chattering about everything and nothing. The spring sun was warm, the prairie was greening after the rains, and for the first time in over a year, Eleanor felt something that might have been peace beginning to take root in her chest. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the life she'd imagined when she was young and foolish and thought love conquered all. But it was real, and it was safe, and it was theirs. That night, after Mira was asleep and the house was quiet, Calder sat at the table writing carefully on a piece of official-looking paper. Eleanor came to stand beside him, reading over his shoulder. It was an affidavit of guardianship, formally declaring his intention to adopt Mira as his legal daughter, signed and dated with the marriage certificate referenced as supporting documentation. "Tomorrow I'll file this with the county clerk," Calder said. "Once it's registered, Jonas's claim becomes void. He'd have to file suit to challenge it, which means he'd have to come here in person." "And if he does?" Calder set down his pen and looked up at her. "Then we'll be ready." Eleanor placed her hand on his shoulder, the first time she'd touched him of her own volition since the wedding. "Thank you for all of this, for giving us a chance." Calder covered her hand with his own, briefly, then let go. "You gave me one too. I haven't felt like I had a purpose beyond work in a long time. Now I do." Eleanor went to bed that night as Mrs. Calder Boone, with her daughter sleeping safely in the next room and a man standing guard, not just over their house, but over their lives. The gold band on her finger felt strange but solid, a tangible reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. Outside, the Texas night was vast and filled with stars. And somewhere to the east, Jonas Crow would eventually learn what she'd done, would learn that she'd found protection he couldn't easily break. Let him learn. Let him come. This time, Eleanor wasn't running. 3 weeks passed like a dream Eleanor kept waiting to wake from. The ranch settled into rhythms that felt almost natural, Calder rising before dawn to tend the cattle, Eleanor managing the house and teaching Mira her letters on the porch in the afternoon sunshine, all of them gathering for supper as the sky turned gold over the prairie. It was domestic and quiet, and so different from the year of running that Eleanor sometimes forgot to be afraid. But she never forgot completely. On a Tuesday morning in late May, Eleanor was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard it, the distant sound of hooves approaching fast. Not the steady pace of Calder returning from checking fence lines, but something urgent, almost reckless. Her hand stilled on the damp sheet she'd been pinning, and that old familiar dread coiled in her stomach like a snake. She turned toward the sound and saw Tom Fairfield riding hard across the east pasture, his horse lathered with sweat. He pulled up near this barn and dismounted before the animal had fully stopped, looking around wildly until he spotted Eleanor. "Mrs. Boone!" He was breathing hard, whether from the ride or from fear Eleanor couldn't tell. "Where's Calder?" "South pasture, checking on the new calves. Tom, what's wrong?" "There's a man in town. Came in on the morning stage asking questions about you and Mira." Tom pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his gray hair. "Martha heard him in the general store talking to Ben Carson. Said he was looking for his sister-in-law, described you both down to the color of Mira's eyes. Martha sent me straight here as soon as she heard." Eleanor's vision narrowed to a pinpoint, then expanded again. She'd known this day would come, had been preparing for it in the back of her mind, even as she let herself believe in the safety of these past weeks. But knowing and experiencing were different things, and the fear that crashed over her now was immediate and visceral. "Did he give a name?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Jonas Crow. Said he had legal business to attend to, was very interested in whether anyone had seen a widow woman with a young daughter passing through." Tom's weathered face was creased with concern. "Martha told Ben to play dumb, but you know how these things go. If he asks enough people, offers enough money, someone will talk." "How long do we have?" "Hard to say. He was still in town an hour ago, but if he hired a horse or a wagon, he could be here by afternoon." Tom stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Martha said he was wearing a badge, some kind of legal authority from Missouri. That true?" Eleanor nodded, her throat tight. "He has guardianship papers for Mira, from before Calder and I married." "Well, those papers don't mean spit now, do they? You're married legal, filed proper with the county, and Calder's adoption papers went through last week. I saw the clerk stamp them myself." Tom's jaw set with determination. "That man's got no claim here. He'll try anyway. Jonas doesn't give up just because something's legal or right. He'll push, he'll threaten, he'll use that badge to intimidate." Eleanor pressed her hand to her chest, trying to slow her racing heart. "I need to get Mira inside. You need to get Calder," Tom interrupted firmly. "I'll ride out and bring him back. You get Mira in the house, lock the doors, and don't open them for anyone but us. Understand?" Eleanor wanted to argue, to say she could handle this herself, but the truth was she couldn't. Not alone. Not against Jonas. "All right, go." Tom was back on his horse before she'd finished speaking, wheeling the tired animal around and kicking it into a gallop toward the south pasture. Eleanor watched him go for only a moment before her maternal instincts took over. She abandoned the laundry and ran toward the front of the house, where Mira was playing with her wooden blocks on the porch steps. "Mira, sweetheart, we need to go inside now." The child looked up, and her small face immediately registered the fear in her mother's voice. She'd learned to read danger in the year they'd spent running, and that terrible knowledge hadn't left her just because they'd found safety. "Is it the bad man? Is Uncle Jonas coming?" Eleanor's heart broke a little that her daughter had to ask such a question. "I don't know yet, but we're going to be very careful, just in case. Come on." She scooped Mira up and carried her inside, setting her down in the bedroom and closing the door. "I want you to stay here, baby. Play with your doll or look at your picture books, but stay in this room and be very quiet. Can you do that for Mama?" Mira nodded, her dark eyes huge in her pale face. "Is Papa Calder coming home?" "Yes, Mr. Tom went to get him. He'll be here soon." Eleanor kissed her daughter's forehead, tasting the salt of her own fear. "Everything's going to be all right, I promise." She closed the bedroom door and moved to the front window, positioning herself where she could see the road but wouldn't be easily visible from outside. Her hands were shaking, so she pressed them flat against the windowsill, trying to ground herself. They had legal standing now. They had Calder. They had friends. This wasn't the same as being alone and hunted on the road, but Jonas had always been good at finding ways around the law. 20 minutes passed like 20 hours. Eleanor watched the road with the intensity of a sentry on guard duty, her breath catching at every movement of grass or shadow of cloud. Behind her, the house was silent, except for the ticking of Calder's mantel clock and the distant sound of Mira humming softly to herself in the bedroom. Then, movement on the horizon. A rider, coming from the direction of town, moving at a steady trot, confident and unhurried. As he got closer, Eleanor could make out details. A tall man, well-dressed in city clothes that looked out of place in ranch country, riding a rented horse with the awkward seat of someone unused to long rides. Even from a distance, even after more than a year, she recognized the set of his shoulders and the way he held his head. Jonas! Eleanor's breath came faster. She backed away from the window, her mind racing through options. She could take Mira and run out the back, try to hide in the barn or the root cellar, but Jonas would search, and they'd be cornered with no way out. She could take Calder's rifle from over the door and meet Jonas on the porch, but she'd never fired a gun in her life, and he'd know it was a bluff. She could... The sound of more hooves, these coming fast from the south. Eleanor spun toward the sound and saw Calder and Tom riding hard across the pasture, pushing their horses as fast as the animals could go. Relief flooded through her so intense it almost brought her to her knees. He was coming. She wasn't alone, but Jonas was closer. Eleanor watched helplessly as the timing played out like some terrible arithmetic problem. Jonas would reach the house first, by maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Not long, but long enough for him to dismount, to knock on the door, to start making his demands. She made a decision. Moving quickly, she went to the mantel and took down the rifle Calder kept there. More for show and hunting than defense, but Jonas wouldn't know that. She checked that it was loaded, thanking God that Calder had shown her how to do that much, then positioned herself just inside the front door, the rifle held across her chest in what she hoped looked like a capable grip. Jonas's horse stopped at the porch steps. Eleanor heard him dismount with a grunt, heard his boots on the wooden stairs. Then his fist hammered on the door, hard and imperious. "Eleanor, I know you're in there. Oh, you're in." "Open this door." His voice sent ice through her veins, familiar and hateful, carrying all the menace of a year's worth of nightmares. But this time, she had more than fear to sustain her. She had rage. "Go away, Jonas," she called through the door, proud that her voice didn't shake. "You have no business here." "I have every business here. I'm Mira's legal guardian, appointed by a judge in St. Louis. You kidnapped that child and dragged her halfway across the country, but that ends today. Open this door or I'll have the law break it down." "You're not her guardian anymore." "I'm married, Jonas. Married, legal, and proper to a man who's adopted Mira as his own daughter. Your papers don't mean anything now." There was a pause, and Eleanor could almost hear Jonas processing this, trying to figure out his next move. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smoother, more reasonable, more dangerous. "Eleanor, be sensible. You can't possibly expect me to believe you married someone in the few weeks since you ran away. This is clearly a fraud, a desperate attempt to avoid your legal obligations. No court will recognize it. The state of Texas recognizes it. That's all that matters. Then I'll see you in court. I'll prove this marriage is a sham, that you coerced some local fool into helping you hide. And when I do, I'll take Mira and you'll never see her again. Is that what you want?" "What I want is for you to leave us alone." Eleanor tightened her grip on the rifle. "You never cared about Mira. You care about her inheritance, about the money you can't touch as long as I have custody. But you won't get it, Jonas. Not now, not ever." The door handle rattled violently. "Open this door, Eleanor. Step away from the door." That was a new voice, deeper and harder than Jonas's, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Step away now, or I'll put you on your back in the dirt." Eleanor's heart leaped. Calder. She heard Jonas move, heard the boards creak as he turned. Through the window, she could see Calder and Tom both dismounted now, standing at the base of the porch steps. Calder had positioned himself front and center, and even through her fear, Eleanor registered the change in him. This wasn't the quiet, careful man who made her coffee in the mornings. This was someone else, someone who stood like he'd been a soldier once and hadn't forgotten how. "Who the hell are you?" Jonas demanded. "Calder Boone, and you're on my property, harassing my wife and frightening my daughter." Calder's voice was level, almost casual, but there was steel underneath it. I'm giving you one chance to leave peacefully. Jonas laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Your wife? Your daughter? Don't make me laugh. This is a fraud and everyone knows it. That woman stole my brother's child and that woman is Eleanor Boone, legally married to me 3 weeks ago in the county chapel with proper witnesses and documentation. The child is Mira Boone, legally adopted by me with papers filed at the county clerk's office. You want to challenge that? You take it up with the Texas court. But you don't come to my home and terrorize my family. I have legal authority. You have a piece of paper from Missouri that means nothing here. Calder climbed the steps slowly, deliberately, until he was standing face to face with Jonas on the porch. Eleanor could see them both now through the window, could see how Calder had at least 3 inches and 30 pounds on Jonas, could see how Jonas's certainty was starting to crack. Texas doesn't recognize guardianship claims that supersede a legal parent, and I'm Mira's legal parent now. This is kidnapping. I'll have you arrested. On what grounds? For marrying a widow and adopting her child? For providing a home and safety to people who needed it? Calder's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. You want to try that, Jonas Crow, you go right ahead. But you better have proof that'll stand up in a Texas courtroom, because I've got a marriage certificate, adoption papers, and about 50 neighbors who will testify that Eleanor and Mira have been living here as my family for nearly a month now. Jonas's face was reddening, the way it always did when someone challenged him. Eleanor knew that look, knew it preceded violence more often than not. She tightened her grip on the rifle, ready to step out if needed. You don't know what you're dealing with, Jonas snarled. I have resources. I have connections. I'll make your life hell. You're welcome to try. Calder didn't move, didn't back down an inch. But right now, you're trespassing. And in Texas, a man's got the right to defend his property and family by whatever means necessary. You understand what I'm saying to you? The threat was clear, and even Jonas wasn't stupid enough to miss it. But he wasn't ready to give up either. I'll be back. With the law, with lawyers, with whatever it takes. That child is mine by right. That child is mine by love. Calder's voice cracked like a whip. And there's not a judge in the world who'll take a girl from a good home just to satisfy your greed. Now get off my land before I remove you myself. For a long moment, Jonas just stood there, his face working through a series of emotions, rage, calculation, frustrated fury. Then he looked past Calder to the door, raising his voice. Eleanor, you think you're safe here? You think this ranch hand can protect you? I'll be back, and when I come, I'll have the authority to take Mira whether you like it or not. You hear me? I'll have what's mine. The door swung open, and Eleanor stepped out onto the porch, rifle raised and pointed directly at Jonas's chest. Her hands were steady now, all her fear burned away by pure maternal fury. Get away from my daughter, she said quietly. Get away from my home, and don't come back. Jonas stared at her, then at the rifle, then at Calder, who'd moved to stand beside Eleanor. Tom was climbing the steps now too, taking up position on Calder's other side. 3 against 1, and Jonas might have legal papers, but they had something stronger: conviction, unity, and the home ground advantage. This isn't over, Jonas said, but he was backing down the steps now, moving toward his horse. Not by a long shot. Yes, Calder said flatly. It is. They stood together on the porch, Calder, Eleanor, and Tom, and watched as Jonas mounted his rented horse with jerky, angry movements. He wheeled the animal around and kicked it harder than necessary, sending it cantering back down the road toward town. They watched until he was just a speck on the horizon, then until he disappeared completely. Only then did Eleanor lower the rifle. Her hands started shaking immediately, all the adrenaline draining out of her at once. Calder took the rifle gently from her grip and handed it to Tom, then caught Eleanor as her knees buckled. I've got you, he murmured, his arms solid around her waist. You did good. You stood your ground. Is he gone? Is he really gone? For now, Calder's face was grim, but he meant what he said. He'll be back, or he'll send someone official. We need to be ready. The bedroom door flew open and Mira came running out, launching herself at Eleanor with the full force of her small body. Eleanor caught her, holding her tight, feeling the child's heart racing against her own. Mama, I heard shouting. I heard Uncle Jonas. I know, baby. I know. But he's gone now. Papa Calder sent him away. Mira turned in Eleanor's arms to look at Calder, her small face serious. Did you really send the bad man away, Papa Calder? Calder knelt down, bringing himself to Mira's level. I did. And I'll do it again as many times as it takes. Nobody's going to take you away from your mama, or from me. You understand? You're my daughter now, and I protect what's mine. Mira reached out and took Calder's hand with complete trust, and Eleanor saw something shift in his expression, a deepening of the commitment he'd made, a cementing of bonds that had started as practical arrangement but were becoming something more. Tom cleared his throat. I should get back to Martha, let her know what happened. But Calder, you should know, that man's not working alone. Martha said he came in on the stage with another fellow, big man who looked like hired muscle. Jonas stayed in town but sent the other one to the telegraph office. They're sending for something or someone. Lawyers, probably, Calder said grimly, or more legal documentation. Maybe even law enforcement from Missouri. Can they do that? Can they make Texas lawmen help them? Depends on what they claim and who they know. Calder stood, his face thoughtful. But it doesn't matter. We're not doing anything illegal, and we've got documentation to prove it. If Jonas wants a fight, we'll give him one. After Tom left, Eleanor moved mechanically through the motions of making lunch, though none of them had much appetite. Mira stayed close to her, not speaking much, her usual chatter subdued by the lingering fear. Calder spent the afternoon on the porch, ostensibly mending tack, but really keeping watch on the road. That evening, after Mira had finally fallen asleep exhausted in her bed, Eleanor and Calder sat at the table with the lamp turned low. The marriage certificate and adoption papers were spread between them, along with a letter Calder had drafted to the county judge explaining the situation. I'll ride to town tomorrow, Calder said. Calder Porterum. File a formal complaint about Jonas's harassment. Make sure the sheriff knows what's happening, so if Jonas tries to claim we're doing something wrong, there's already a record of his threats. Will that be enough? I don't know. Calder rubbed his face tiredly. The law is complicated, especially when it crosses state lines. But Eleanor, I meant what I said to Jonas. I won't let him take Mira, whatever it costs, whatever I have to do. This is my fight, not yours. You shouldn't have to. It became my fight the day I married you. Calder reached across the table and covered her hand with his. It was only the second time he'd touched her of his own volition, and the warmth of his palm against her skin sent a shock through her. We're family now. That means we face things together. Eleanor turned her hand over, letting their fingers intertwine. I'm scared, Calder. Not for me, but for Mira. For what this might do to her. She's just started to feel safe again, to laugh and play like a normal child. If Jonas drags this out, if he makes her testify or appear in court, we won't let it get that far. Calder's grip tightened. Tomorrow I'm also riding to see Judge Harrison. He's a fair man and he knows me. I'll explain everything, show him our documentation, and ask for his counsel. If Jonas files suit, at least we'll have the judge's ear first. And if that's not enough? Calder was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was serious. Then we consider other options. I've got friends from my army days scattered across 3 territories. If we had to, we could move, all 3 of us, start fresh somewhere Jonas couldn't find us. Run again, you mean? Not run. Relocate. Strategic retreat. He met her eyes. But I don't think it'll come to that. Jonas is a bully, Eleanor. Bullies fold when they meet real resistance. He came here expecting to intimidate you into giving up. Instead, he found a united front. That'll shake him more than you know. Eleanor wanted to believe him, wanted to think that Jonas would give up, accept defeat, leave them in peace. But she'd known Jonas for years before William died, had watched him manipulate and scheme and refuse to accept any outcome that didn't favor him. Men like that didn't just fold, but maybe, just maybe, they could be outmaneuvered. Over the next 3 days, Calder made good on his promises. He rode to town and spoke with both the sheriff and Judge Harrison, laying out the full story with calm precision. He filed formal complaints and made sure their documentation was copied and registered in multiple places. He even sent telegrams to contacts he had in Austin, lawyers who'd served with him in the war and might be able to advise them on interstate custody law. Tom Fairfield spread the word among the neighboring ranchers, and by the end of the week, Calder had promises of support from at least a dozen men, all willing to testify to Eleanor and Mira's good character, all willing to vouch for Calder's standing in the community. It was a show of solidarity that made Eleanor's chest tight with gratitude. Jonas, meanwhile, stayed in town. According to Martha, who made it her business to know everything happening at the boarding house where Jonas was staying, he spent his days at the telegraph office, sending and receiving messages, and his evenings drinking in the saloon and complaining loudly about corrupt Texas justice to anyone who'd listen. "He's waiting for something," Martha reported to Eleanor during one of her visits to the ranch. "Or someone. He's got that look about him, like a snake coiled up, just waiting to strike." "Let him wait," Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. "We're ready." But on the 8th day after Jonas's arrival, what they'd been waiting for finally happened. Eleanor was in the garden behind the house, helping Mira identify vegetables growing in neat rows, when she heard horses, multiple horses, moving at a measured pace. Her heart kicked into overdrive, and she grabbed Mira's hand. "Inside, sweetheart, quickly!" They'd just reached the porch when Calder came around from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd heard the horses too, and his face was set in grim lines. "Get inside and stay there," he told Eleanor. "I'll handle this." But Eleanor shook her head. "We're in this together, remember? Mira, go to our bedroom and wait there. Lock the door." Mira obeyed without argument, her small face pale but determined. Eleanor took her place beside Calder on the porch just as the riders came into view around the bend in the road. There were 5 of them. Jonas rode in front, looking smug and vindicated. Beside him was a tall man wearing a marshal's badge that caught the afternoon sun. Behind them rode 3 more men, deputies, Eleanor guessed, or hired guns dressed up as law enforcement. All of them were armed. The group stopped at the edge of the yard, and the marshal dismounted with deliberate slowness. He was middle-aged, with steel-gray hair and the weathered look of a man who'd spent decades enforcing law in hard places. His eyes swept over the ranch, taking in details, before settling on Calder and Eleanor. "Calder Boone?" His voice was gravelly but not unkind. "That's right. I'm Marshal William Tucker, out of Fort Worth. This gentleman here," he gestured to Jonas, "has filed a complaint alleging kidnapping and custodial interference. I'm here to investigate those allegations and, if warranted, take the child Mira Briggs into protective custody pending a court hearing." Eleanor felt the ground tilt beneath her. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading. But Calder's hand found hers, squeezing once, grounding her. "Marshal, I appreciate you doing your job," Calder said calmly. "But I think you'll find those allegations don't hold water. My wife and I have full legal custody of our daughter, properly documented and filed with this county. Mr. Crow's claims are based on outdated paperwork that was superseded by our marriage and my adoption of the child." Jonas stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. "That's a lie. This so-called marriage is a fraud, a desperate scheme to avoid the law. I have guardianship papers signed by a judge in St. Louis, which were valid when Eleanor Briggs was a widow with no other legal guardian appointed," Calder interrupted. "But she's not a widow anymore, she's my wife, and I'm Mira's legal father. Missouri law doesn't override Texas law regarding custody of children in legal families." Marshal Tucker held up a hand, silencing them both. "I'm not here to argue law with you, gentlemen. That's for the courts to decide. I'm here to ensure the child's welfare and safety while this gets sorted out." He turned to Eleanor. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to speak with the girl, verify her well-being, ask her some questions. You understand?" Eleanor's throat closed. This was the nightmare. Having strange men question Mira, having her daughter frightened and confused, possibly being taken away. But before she could respond, Calder spoke. "You can speak with her, Marshal, but you'll do it here, in her home, with her parents present, and you'll do it respectfully without intimidation. She's 5 years old and she's been through enough trauma already." The Marshal studied Calder for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That's fair. Mr. Crow, you'll wait out here. This isn't an interrogation, it's a welfare check." Jonas started to protest, but Tucker silenced him with a look that said he'd dealt with difficult men before and wouldn't tolerate nonsense. Eleanor felt a small spark of hope. The Marshal seemed like a reasonable man, someone who might actually listen to truth, instead of just enforcing whatever the loudest voice demanded. They brought Mira out to the porch, Eleanor carrying her because the child had gone rigid with fear when she'd heard strange voices. Mira buried her face in her mother's shoulder, trembling. Marshal Tucker removed his hat and knelt down on the porch, bringing himself below Mira's eye level, a gesture that reminded Eleanor painfully of the way Calder had first approached her daughter. Some men understood how to seem less threatening to frightened children. "Hello there, Mira. My name is William. Can you look at me for just a moment?" Slowly, Mira turned her head, peeking out at the marshal with wide, dark eyes. "That's good. I'm not here to hurt you or scare you, I promise. I just want to make sure you're all right. Can you tell me if you're being treated well here?" Mira nodded, still pressed against Eleanor. "Can you use words, sweetheart? Are these people kind to you?" "Yes." Mira's voice was barely above a whisper. "Mama and Papa Calder are very kind." "Papa Calder?" Tucker glanced at Calder, then back to Mira. "Is that what you call Mr. Boone?" "Yes. He's my papa now. My real papa went to heaven, but Papa Calder takes care of us. He gives me honey when I'm sick and teaches me about horses and reads me stories before bed." The words came faster now, as if once started, Mira couldn't stop. "And he makes Mama smile, and he never yells. And he said nobody will take me away because I'm his daughter, and he protects what's his." Tucker's expression softened. He looked at Calder with something approaching respect, then turned back to Mira. "Are you afraid of anyone here?" "No." "Not your mama or Papa Calder?" "No, they would never hurt me. They love me." Mira turned in Eleanor's arms to point at Jonas, who stood fuming at the edge of the yard. "He's the bad man, Uncle Jonas. He's mean and scary, and he wants to take me away from Mama. Don't let him, Mr. William. Please don't let him." The marshal stood slowly, settling his hat back on his head. He looked from Mira's frightened face to Eleanor's protective grip to Calder's steady, unflinching stance. Then he looked at Jonas, and his expression hardened. "Mr. Crow, I've seen a lot of custody disputes in my time. I've seen children who are genuinely in danger, genuinely being mistreated or neglected. This," he gestured to the porch, "is not that. This is a child who's happy, healthy, and loved, living with two parents who are properly married and legally documented. Whatever your grievances might be, they don't warrant removing this child from her home." "That's not your decision to make," Jonas's voice cracked with fury. "I have legal standing. You have paperwork that may or may not hold up in court. What you don't have is any evidence of wrongdoing here." Tucker's voice was firm. "I'm not removing this child, and I'm not filing charges. If you want to pursue this, Mr. Crow, you take it to a Texas court and let a judge sort it out. But you leave these people alone in the meantime." "I'll have your badge for this. I have connections, I have resources. Then use them in court, like a civilized man." Tucker mounted his horse, and his 3 deputies did the same. "Mr. Boone, Mrs. Boone, I apologize for the disturbance. You have my word that unless a court orders otherwise, no one will be coming to take your daughter." He tipped his hat to them, then fixed Jonas with a hard stare. "Mr. Crow, I suggest you leave these good people in peace, and I'll be watching to make sure you do." They rode off, leaving Jonas standing alone in the yard. For a moment he just stood there, his face working through rage and disbelief. Then he turned to Calder and Eleanor, and the look in his eyes was pure venom. "This isn't finished," he said, his voice shaking. "You think you've won, but you haven't. I'll find a way. I'll find a lawyer who knows how to expose fraud. I'll find a judge who'll see through your pathetic charade, and I'll make sure both of you pay for this." Calder descended the porch steps slowly, deliberately, until he was standing directly in front of Jonas. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried across the yard with perfect clarity. "If you come back here, if you send anyone else here, if you so much as send a threatening letter to my family, I will make it my personal mission to ruin you. I'll hire investigators to dig into every shady deal you've ever made, every bribe you've paid, every law you've bent. I'll expose you in every newspaper from here to Missouri. And Jonas?" He leaned in close. "I have the money and the connections to do it. So ask yourself if this is really worth it." Jonas's face went white, then red. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might actually take a swing at Calder, but then sense, or maybe just cowardice, prevailed. Jonas spat in the dirt at Calder's feet and stalked to his horse. "You'll regret this," he threw over his shoulder as he mounted. "All of you will regret this." He rode off at a gallop, disappearing down the road in a cloud of dust and impotent fury. The silence that followed was profound. Eleanor stood on the porch, still holding Mira, and felt every muscle in her body begin to shake. They'd done it. They'd faced Jonas with the law on his side, and they'd won. Calder climbed the steps and put his arm around both of them, creating a protective circle. "It's over," he said softly. "The worst is over." "Is it really?" Eleanor's voice cracked. "Or will he just keep trying?" "Let him try." Calder's voice was fierce now, protective. "Every time he comes at us, we'll be ready. And every time he'll lose, because we have what he doesn't, truth, law, and love on our side. That's a combination he can't beat." That night, they sat together long after Mira had fallen asleep. Eleanor made coffee and they drank it in silence, processing everything that had happened. The relief was overwhelming, but underneath it was exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of people who'd been fighting for so long, they'd forgotten what peace felt like. Finally, Calder spoke. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." Eleanor looked at him over her cup. "All right. Do you regret this? The marriage, the staying here, all of it? Because if Jonas is going to keep making trouble, it's going to be hard on all of us. And if you'd rather take Mira and try for California after all, I'll help you. No hard feelings." Eleanor set down her cup and looked at this man who'd given them everything, safety, family, a future, without asking for anything in return except the chance to protect them. She thought about the past weeks, about watching Mira bloom like a flower finally given sun and water, about learning to trust again, about the tentative roots they'd begun to put down in this place. "No," she said firmly, "I don't regret it. This is home now, for both of us. And we're not leaving." Something in Calder's expression eased, a tension she hadn't fully registered until it released. "Good," he said quietly, "because I don't want you to leave. Either of you. This house was just walls before you came. Now it's a home." Eleanor reached across the table and took his hand, properly this time, with intention and meaning. "Thank you, Calder, for everything, for being the man you are." He squeezed her hand, and they sat like that for a long time, connected by touch and by something deeper, something that had started as contract but was growing into partnership, respect, maybe even the beginnings of something more. Outside, the Texas night was peaceful, full of stars and possibility. And somewhere on the road to town, Jonas Crow was riding away, defeated if not yet destroyed. The battle was won. The war might not be over. But for tonight, they were safe. They were together. They were family. And that was enough. The days following Jonas's defeat settled into something that felt almost like normalcy, though Eleanor kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. She'd learned not to trust peace, not to believe in safety that came too easily. But as May turned to June and the prairie exploded with wildflowers, she began to let herself exhale. Calder maintained his vigilance without being obvious about it. He made sure someone was always at the ranch, either himself or one of the hands he'd hired on for the season. He kept the rifle loaded and within easy reach. And every time he rode to town, he stopped by the telegraph office to check for messages, by the sheriff's office to confirm no new complaints had been filed. But there was nothing. Jonas had vanished like smoke, and with each passing day, the knot in Eleanor's chest loosened just slightly. 2 weeks after the confrontation with Marshall Tucker, Eleanor was kneading bread dough at the kitchen table when she heard a horse approaching. Her hand stilled automatically, that old fear spiking, but then she heard Calder's voice calling out a greeting and recognized the answering voice as Tom Fairfield's. She wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch just as Tom dismounted, pulling a leather satchel from his saddlebag. His weathered face was creased with a smile. "Morning, Mrs. Boone. Is Calder around?" "In the barn checking on the new foal. I'll get him." But Calder was already emerging, wiping his hands on a rag. "Tom, what brings you out here?" "Mail run from town. Got something for you that looks official." Tom handed over the satchel. "Came by special courier this morning. Figured you'd want to see it right away." Eleanor's heart started racing again. Official mail, courier. It could be anything, a lawsuit from Jonas, a summons to court, new legal challenges. She descended the porch steps and moved close to Calder, trying to read his expression as he pulled out a thick envelope with official seals. He opened it carefully, scanning the contents while Eleanor held her breath. Then his face did something she'd never seen before. It broke into a genuine wide smile that transformed his usually serious features. "It's from Judge Harrison," he said, looking up at Eleanor with something like wonder in his eyes. "Jonas filed a petition with the district court challenging our custody of Mira. The judge reviewed all the documentation, ours and Jonas's, and dismissed the case. Completely. He's ruled that our marriage and adoption are valid and legal, that Jonas has no standing to challenge them, and that any further attempts to do so would constitute harassment and be subject to sanctions." Eleanor felt her knees go weak. "He dismissed it? Completely?" "Completely." Calder kept reading, his smile growing wider. "There's more. Judge Harrison's issued a restraining order against Jonas. He's forbidden from coming within 50 miles of this ranch or from contacting you or Mira in any way. If he violates it, he'll be arrested." Tom let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses. "Hot damn, excuse my language, Mrs. Boone, but that's the best news I've heard all month. Wait till Martha hears this." Eleanor reached for the porch railing, needing something solid to hold on to as the full weight of it hit her. It was over. Really, truly over. Jonas couldn't touch them anymore. The law, the same law she'd been running from for so long, had finally, miraculously, protected them instead of threatening them. "Eleanor?" Calder was beside her suddenly, his hand on her arm, steadying her. "Are you all right?" She looked up at him, and the tears she'd been holding back for months finally broke free. But these weren't tears of fear or desperation. These were relief and gratitude and overwhelming emotion that had nowhere else to go. "We're safe," she whispered. "Mira's safe." "Yes." Calder pulled her into an embrace that was brief but solid, his arms strong around her. "You're both safe now. I promised you that, and I meant it." Eleanor let herself lean into him for just a moment, accepting the comfort and strength he offered. Over his shoulder, she could see Tom beaming at them both, clearly pleased with himself for delivering such good news. When they separated, Eleanor wiped her eyes and laughed, a sound that felt rusty from disuse but genuine. "I should tell Mira. She should know she doesn't have to be afraid anymore." They found Mira in the bedroom, playing with her doll and singing softly to herself. When Eleanor told her the news in simple terms, that Uncle Jonas couldn't come back, that a judge had said Mira belonged with Mama and Papa Calder forever, the child's face lit up with an expression of pure joy that made Eleanor's heart ache. "Forever?" Mira asked, as if testing the word. "Like real forever, not just pretend?" "Real forever," Calder confirmed, kneeling beside her. "You're my daughter now, in every way that matters. No one can change that." Mira launched herself at Calder with such force that he had to catch himself against the wall to keep from toppling over. She wrapped her small arms around his neck and held on like she'd never let go. "I love you, Papa Calder," she said into his shoulder, her voice muffled but clear. Eleanor watched Calder's face transform, saw the sudden shine of tears in his eyes, the way his jaw clenched as he fought for composure, the fierce tenderness with which he held Mira close. "I love you too, little one," he said roughly, "more than you know." That evening, after Mira had been tucked into bed and the excitement had settled, Eleanor found herself restless. The bread she'd been making had risen and been baked, the supper dishes were washed and put away, and still she couldn't settle. The relief that should have calmed her was instead making her feel electric, alive in a way she hadn't felt in over a year. She stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the warm June night. The stars were brilliant overhead, and somewhere in the distance cattle lowed softly to each other. It was peaceful and beautiful and everything she'd dreamed of during those desperate months of running. The door opened behind her, and Calder joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one without speaking, and they stood side by side, looking out at the dark prairie. "I keep waiting to wake up," Eleanor said quietly, "to find out this was all a dream, and I'm still broken down in the storm, dying beside a wagon." "It's not a dream," Calder's voice was equally soft. "It's real. You made it real by being brave enough to accept help when it was offered." I didn't feel brave. I felt desperate. Sometimes those are the same thing. He took a sip of his coffee. You did what you had to do to protect your daughter. That's the definition of courage. Eleanor turned to look at him, really look at him in the starlight. This man who'd saved them, sheltered them, fought for them without hesitation. This man who'd offered marriage as a legal protection, but had given them so much more: a home, safety, love. Why did you really do it? She asked. The truth called her. Why did you help us? He was quiet for a long time, staring out at the darkness. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with old pain. I told you about my wife, about coming home and finding her dead. What I didn't tell you was that she was pregnant when I left for the war, 7 months along. The baby, our son, died with her. Fever took them both, and there was no one to help, no one to bring medicine or water or just hold her hand while she suffered. He swallowed hard. I came home to 2 graves instead of a family, and I swore that if I ever got a chance to prevent that kind of loss for someone else, I'd take it. No hesitation, no questions asked. Eleanor felt her throat close. Calder, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. Just understand. When I found you and Mira in that storm, dying slowly of hunger and exposure, it was like God was giving me a second chance. A chance to save someone instead of just burying them. I couldn't let that pass. He looked at her then, and his eyes reflected the starlight. And then I got to know you, got to see how strong you are, how fierce in protecting what you love. Got to watch Mira come back to life, got to hear her laugh again. And somewhere along the way, this stopped being about redemption and started being about family. Family, Eleanor repeated softly. Yes, real family. Not just paper and convenience, but… He trailed off, as if afraid to finish the thought. Eleanor set down her coffee cup and took a step closer to him. They'd been dancing around this for weeks, the growing connection between them, the way casual touches lingered longer, the way they'd catch each other's eyes across the room and smile for no reason at all. But what? She prompted gently. Calder set down his own cup and turned to face her fully. But something real, something that matters. Eleanor, I know this started as a legal arrangement. I know I promised you your own space, your own choices, no expectations. And I'll honor that promise for as long as you want me to. But I need you to know… He took a breath. I need you to know that at some point, without meaning to, I fell in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, vulnerable and honest and terrifying. Eleanor's heart hammered in her chest, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. I don't expect you to say it back, Calder continued quickly. I know you married me for protection, for Mira's sake. I know your feelings might not… Stop, Eleanor interrupted. She reached up and placed her hand against his chest, feeling his heart racing under her palm. Just stop talking for a moment. He fell silent, watching her with barely contained hope and fear in his eyes. Eleanor had spent so long running, so long protecting herself and Mira, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be vulnerable in a good way, to open herself up to possibility instead of just defending against threat. But standing here in the starlight with this good, honest, courageous man, she realized she didn't want to keep her heart locked away anymore. I didn't marry you for love, she said quietly. That's true. I married you because I was desperate and you offered salvation. But Calder, somewhere between that first terrible night and now, something changed for me too. I started looking forward to your footsteps on the porch in the evening, started listening for your voice in the morning, started feeling safe, not just because of what you provide, but because of who you are. His hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his chest. Eleanor, I'm not good at this, she said, her voice shaking slightly. The pretty words and declarations? My first marriage was arranged by my parents, and my husband was kind, but we were never really partners. We were never really equals. But with you, I feel like I could be. Like we could be. You are my equal, Calder said fiercely, in every way that matters. Then maybe… Eleanor took a breath, gathering her courage. Maybe we could try. Not just as a legal arrangement, but as a real marriage. As real partners building a real life together. The smile that broke across Calder's face was like sunrise, transforming everything. He raised her hand from his chest to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, reverently. "I would like that," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I would like that very much." Eleanor felt something unfurl in her chest, something that had been locked down tight for so long she'd forgotten it existed. Hope, joy, the possibility of happiness that wasn't just survival but actual contentment. "Can I kiss you?" Calder asked, and the fact that he asked, that he gave her the choice, made Eleanor love him even more. "Yes," she whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, but Eleanor didn't want to. She rose on her toes to meet him, and when their lips touched, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Not passionate like in romance novels, but real. A meeting of two people who'd both been broken and were choosing to be whole together. When they separated, Eleanor was smiling, really smiling, for the first time in longer than she could remember. Calder rested his forehead against hers, and they stood like that for a long moment, just breathing together. "We should probably talk about the practicalities," Eleanor said eventually, though she didn't move away. "About what this means, about sleeping arrangements, and tomorrow," Calder interrupted softly. "We can figure out all the details tomorrow. Tonight, can we just be happy?" Eleanor thought about all the time she'd had to plan every detail, prepare for every contingency, stay 3 steps ahead of disaster. Maybe it was time to just let herself feel something good without immediately analyzing it to death. "Yes," she agreed. "Tonight we can just be happy." They stayed on the porch until the coffee grew cold, talking quietly about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, hopes for the future, small observations about Mira's growing confidence and the ranch's improving fortunes. It was ordinary and extraordinary all at once, the kind of conversation that builds intimacy brick by brick. When Eleanor finally went to bed that night, she paused in the doorway of what had been her room and looked back at Calder, who was banking the fire in the stove. "Calder?" He looked up. "Thank you for everything, for saving us, for loving us." His smile was soft and genuine. "Thank you for letting me." Over the next few weeks, they found their new rhythm. It wasn't a dramatic change. They still maintained separate sleeping spaces for propriety, and because they both agreed they wanted to take things slowly, to build their relationship on solid ground rather than rushing into physical intimacy just because they were legally married. But there were small shifts that spoke to the deepening of their bond. Calder started reaching for Eleanor's hand when they sat together in the evenings. Eleanor began greeting him with a kiss when he came in from working, nothing scandalous, but enough to mark affection and connection. They made decisions together about the ranch and Mira's education, functioning as true partners rather than landlord and reluctant tenant. Mira, with the uncanny awareness children possess, seemed to sense the change in the atmosphere between her parents and bloomed even more. She started calling the ranch home without hesitation, making plans for future events, planting a garden next spring, learning to ride when she got bigger, asking if she could have a kitten from the barn cat's next litter. Martha Fairfield visited one afternoon in late June and pulled Eleanor aside while Calder was teaching Mira to collect eggs in the chicken coop. "You look different," Martha said bluntly, studying Eleanor's face. "Lighter, somehow, like you finally stopped waiting for the sky to fall." Eleanor smiled, watching through the window as Calder patiently showed Mira how to approach the hens without startling them. "Maybe I have. For the first time in a very long time, I'm letting myself believe things might actually work out." "They will if you work at it," Martha said practically. "Marriage isn't about grand gestures and constant romance. It's about showing up every day, choosing each other even when it's hard, building something together that's stronger than what either of you could make alone." "Is that the secret? Just keep showing up?" "That's most of it. The rest is communication, compromise, and occasionally admitting when you're wrong, even if it kills you." Martha patted Eleanor's hand. "But you two are starting from a good place. You respect each other. That's rarer than you'd think." Through the window, Mira squealed with delight as a hen jumped out of her reach, and Calder's laugh rang out, deep and genuine and full of joy. Eleanor felt her heart swell with an emotion so powerful it almost hurt. "I love him," she said, the words surprising her even as she spoke them. "I really do love him," Martha smiled. I know. Anyone with eyes can see it. The question is, have you told him? Eleanor realized she hadn't. Not in so many words. They'd talked about trying for a real marriage, about building a partnership. But she hadn't actually said the words I love you back to him. She'd been so focused on taking things slowly, on not rushing, that she'd forgotten sometimes it was important to just speak the truth plainly. That evening, after Mira was asleep and they were sitting together on the porch in their customary spots, Eleanor reached for Calder's hand. I need to tell you something. He tensed slightly, old worries probably surfacing. All right. That night you told me you loved me, I didn't say it back. I wanted to, but I was scared. Scared of being vulnerable. Scared of admitting to feelings that made me dependent on someone else. Scared that if I said the words out loud, something bad would happen to take it all away. She squeezed his hand. But I'm tired of being scared, so I'm saying it now. I love you, Calder Boone. I love who you are, how you make me feel safe and respected and valued. I love how you are with Mira, how patient and kind and strong. I love that you gave us everything and asked for nothing in return. I just love you. Calder's eyes shone in the lamplight. He lifted her hand to his lips again, kissing it with such tenderness that Eleanor felt tears prick her own eyes. I love you too, he said, though she already knew. More every day. You and Mira are the best things that ever happened to me. Even though we brought chaos and danger and legal trouble into your peaceful life, he laughed. Even though, especially though, this house was too quiet before you came. Now it's full of life and laughter and love. That's worth any amount of trouble. They sat together as the stars came out, making quiet plans for the future. Calder wanted to expand the cattle operation, maybe hire another hand or two. Eleanor was thinking about starting a vegetable garden, maybe some chickens beyond the few they already had, contributing to the ranch's productivity in ways that suited her skills. They talked about Mira's education, whether to hire a tutor or wait until she was old enough for the small schoolhouse in town. They were building something, Eleanor realized. Not just surviving, but actually creating a life together. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. 3 days later, Eleanor was mixing biscuit dough for supper when Calder came in from town earlier than expected, his face serious but not worried. He carried a newspaper folded under his arm. Eleanor, you should see this. She wiped her hands and took the paper he offered. It was the St. Louis Gazette, several weeks old but still readable. Calder pointed to a small article on the third page. Local man arrested for fraud and embezzlement, read the headline. Eleanor's eyes skimmed the text, her heart beginning to race. Jonas Crow had been arrested in St. Louis on charges of embezzling funds from the estate he'd been managing, the same estate that included Mira's inheritance. Apparently, an investigation triggered by his failed custody attempt had uncovered years of financial misconduct. He was currently awaiting trial and facing significant prison time. Eleanor read the article twice, making sure she understood. Jonas wasn't just defeated, he was destroyed. His corruption exposed, his freedom in jeopardy, his ability to threaten them utterly eliminated. It's really over, she breathed. This time it's really, truly over. Calder wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. Yes, and more than that, the estate investigation means they'll recover the money Jonas stole. Mira's inheritance will be protected, probably even increased with penalties and interest. When she turns 18, she'll have something substantial waiting for her. Eleanor turned in his arms, looking up at him. We should tell her, not the complicated parts, but that Uncle Jonas can never bother us again, that he can't hurt anyone else. They sat Mira down after supper, explaining in simple terms that Uncle Jonas had done bad things and was going to face consequences, that she was safe forever now, that nothing and no one would ever take her away from her family. Mira listened carefully, then asked the question that was somehow both childish and deeply profound. Is he sorry for being mean? Eleanor and Calder exchanged glances. I don't know, sweetheart, Eleanor admitted. But whether he's sorry or not, he can't hurt us anymore. That's what matters. Mira considered this, then nodded with the easy acceptance of childhood. Okay, can I go play now? Just like that. The shadow that had haunted them for over a year was banished to irrelevance. Mira went back to her dolls without a second thought, already moving on in the way children could when they felt truly secure. That night, Eleanor stood in the doorway between her bedroom and Calder's, the door that had remained carefully closed since they'd married. She'd been thinking about Martha's words, about showing up and choosing each other, about building something together. She knocked softly, and Calder appeared in the doorway, surprise and hope mingling in his expression. "I was thinking," Eleanor said quietly, conscious of Mira sleeping in the room down the hall. "We've been taking things slowly, building trust and partnership, and that's been good, necessary even. But we're married, Calder, really married now, in heart as well as paper. And I don't want to sleep alone anymore." Calder's eyes darkened with emotion. "Are you sure?" "There's no rush, Eleanor. I meant what I said about not expecting—" "I know what you said, and I'm grateful for it. But I'm also sure." She reached out and took his hand. "I want to share a room with my husband. I want to fall asleep next to you and wake up beside you. I want all of it, Calder, a real marriage in every sense." He pulled her close, holding her tight. "Then you'll have it. Everything I am, everything I have, it's yours. It's been yours since the moment you said yes." Moving Eleanor's belongings from one room to another was a simple task that felt monumentally significant. They did it together the next morning while Mira helped, the child delighted by this visible sign that her parents were truly together now. "Are you going to have a baby?" Mira asked with the blunt curiosity of a 5-year-old, and Eleanor nearly dropped the armful of dresses she was carrying. Calder coughed to cover a laugh, then knelt beside Mira. "Maybe someday, if we're blessed with one. Would you like a little brother or sister?" Mira considered this seriously. "Only if they don't touch my dolls." Eleanor and Calder exchanged amused glances over her head. The thought of a baby, of expanding their family, was both thrilling and terrifying. But it was also possible now in a way it hadn't been before, when every day was about survival rather than building a future. As June faded into July, the ranch flourished. The cattle were thriving. The garden Eleanor had planted was producing vegetables in abundance. And Calder had successfully negotiated contracts with 2 buyers in Fort Worth that would bring substantial income come fall roundup. They were building something sustainable, something that would provide security for years to come. But more than the material success, the emotional landscape of the ranch had transformed. The house that had been silent and lonely when Eleanor first arrived was now full of life. Mira's laughter, Eleanor singing as she worked, Calder's voice reading aloud from books in the evening. They'd become a family not because the law said so, but because they'd chosen each other every single day. On a warm Sunday morning in late July, Eleanor woke before dawn with Calder's arm heavy and warm around her waist. She lay still for a moment, savoring the peace of it, the simple rightness of being held by someone she loved and trusted completely. "You're awake," Calder murmured against her hair, his voice rough with sleep. "Just thinking." "About what?" Eleanor turned in his arms so she could see his face in the pre-dawn light filtering through the window. "About how different everything is now. 7 months ago, I was alone and desperate, sleeping in a broken wagon with no hope left. Now I'm here, with you, with a home and safety and love. Sometimes I can barely believe it's real." Calder's hand came up to cup her cheek. "It's real. We're real. And Eleanor—" He paused, as if weighing his words carefully. "I want you to know you didn't just give me a family. You gave me a purpose, a reason to build something beyond just getting through each day. You made me believe in the future again." Eleanor kissed him softly, pouring everything she felt into the gentle contact. When they separated, she smiled. "I didn't give you anything. We gave it to each other. That's what partnership means." They lay together watching the sun rise through the window, painting the room in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere in the house, Mira would wake soon and come padding out in her nightgown, looking for breakfast and attention. The day would unfold with its usual rhythms, work and meals and small domestic tasks that somehow added up to a life. It wasn't the life Eleanor had imagined for herself when she was young and foolish. It was better. It was real and hard-won and built on foundations of trust and choice rather than expectation and obligation. "What are you thinking now?" Calder asked, watching her face. That I'm happy, Eleanor said simply. After everything, after loss and fear and desperate running, I'm genuinely, completely happy. I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again. Calder pulled her closer, and Eleanor settled against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Outside, the ranch was waking up, cattle lowing, birds singing, the wind moving through the prairie grass. It was the sound of home. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, Calder replied. Both of you. My girls. My family. They had survived the storm and found each other. They had faced down threats and overcome them together. They had built something from nothing, transformed desperation into hope, turned a legal arrangement into a love story. And the best part, the most miraculous part, was that this was just the beginning. The future stretched before them full of possibility and promise, and for the first time in years, Eleanor wasn't afraid to face it. She was ready. They were ready. Together. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning in early August, carried by a courier who'd ridden hard from Fort Worth. Eleanor was hanging sheets on the line when she saw the dust cloud approaching, and her first instinct was still that old, familiar dread. Even though they'd had months of peace, even though Jonas was in prison awaiting trial, her body remembered danger and responded before her mind could catch up. But Calder emerged from the barn with his easy, confident stride, and when he took the letter from the courier and read the return address, his face broke into a smile that eased Eleanor's tension immediately. "It's from Judge Harrison," he called to her. "And it's thick. Must be official documents." Eleanor abandoned the laundry and hurried over, wiping her damp hands on her apron. Calder waited for her before opening the envelope, a courtesy that still made her heart warm even after months of such small gestures of partnership. Inside were several official-looking papers and a personal letter in the judge's neat handwriting. Calder read the letter aloud while Eleanor scanned the legal documents over his shoulder. The news was better than they could have hoped. The investigation into Jonas's embezzlement had concluded, and he'd been found guilty on multiple counts of fraud and theft. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison with no possibility of early release. More importantly, the court had ordered full restitution of all stolen funds, plus damages and interest. The executor managing the recovery process had written to inform them that Mira's inheritance had been fully restored and actually increased substantially. Jonas had been skimming from the estate for years before William's death, and all of it was being returned. "There's more," Calder said, his voice thick with emotion. He held up another document. "Judge Harrison has issued a permanent order terminating any and all claims Jonas Crow might have had regarding Mira. Even when he's released from prison, he'll be legally barred from contacting her or you. It's over, Eleanor. Completely and permanently over." Eleanor felt her knees go weak, and Calder steadied her with his free arm around her waist. After all this time, after all the running and fear and desperate fighting, it was truly finished. Jonas was gone, his threats neutralized, his ability to harm them destroyed utterly. "I need to sit down," she managed. They sat together on the porch steps, still reading through the documents, making sure they understood every detail. The trust that would hold Mira's inheritance until she turned 18 was being managed by a reputable firm in St. Louis, with quarterly statements to be sent to Eleanor and Calder as Mira's legal guardians. The amount was substantial, enough to ensure Mira's future education, a good dowry when she married, or capital to start a business if she chose. Everything William had wanted for his daughter, everything Jonas had tried to steal, was now secured forever. "What are you thinking?" Calder asked, watching Eleanor's face. "I'm thinking about William," she admitted. "My first husband. He was a good man, just not a strong one. He couldn't stand up to Jonas, couldn't protect us the way we needed protecting. But he loved Mira so much, and he wanted her to have every opportunity." She looked down at the trust documents. "I wish he could know she's safe now, that his brother didn't win." Calder took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Maybe he does know. Maybe wherever he is, he can see that his daughter is loved and protected and has a future full of promise. And maybe he's grateful that someone stepped in to finish what he couldn't." Eleanor leaned her head on Calder's shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him, the quiet certainty that had become her anchor. "I hope so. He deserves that peace." They sat together in comfortable silence until Mira came running from the barn where she'd been helping one of the ranch hands feed the horses. Her face was flushed with exertion and joy, her dark hair escaping from its braid, and she looked so healthy and happy that Eleanor's heart ached with gratitude. "Mama, Papa called her. Mr. Jesse says one of the horses is going to have a baby soon and I can help take care of it when it comes. Can I, please?" Calder scooped her up and settled her between them on the step. "Of course you can. But Mira, we need to talk to you about something important first." The child's face grew serious immediately, and Eleanor was reminded again how much fear and uncertainty Mira had learned to carry despite her young age. But this time, they had good news. "Remember how we told you that Uncle Jonas couldn't hurt us anymore?" Eleanor began gently. "Well, we just got a letter from a judge, a very important man who makes sure people follow the rules, and he says that Uncle Jonas has to stay far away from us forever. He can never try to take you away again. Not ever." Mira's eyes grew wide. "Forever ever?" "Forever ever," Calder confirmed. "And there's more. Your first papa, before he went to heaven, he left you some money to use when you grow up. Uncle Jonas tried to take it, but now it's been given back and it's safe. When you're older, you can use it for school, or to buy a house, or whatever you want." "Will it buy a pony?" Mira asked with the straightforward practicality of childhood. Calder laughed, the sound full of affection and relief. "Yes, sweet girl. It would buy several ponies, but you have to wait until you're older to decide what to do with it. Until then, your mom and I will make sure it's kept safe for you." Mira seemed to consider this, then nodded with satisfaction. "Okay, can I go tell Mr. Jesse about the baby horse now?" Eleanor smiled through tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Yes, baby, go tell Mr. Jesse." They watched Mira run back toward the barn, her joy uncontained and unshadowed by worry. That was what they'd fought for, Eleanor realized. Not just safety or security or legal protection, but this. The ability for a child to be a child, to worry about ponies and baby horses instead of threats and danger. "She's going to be all right," Calder said quietly, as if reading Eleanor's thoughts. "Better than all right. She's going to grow up strong and confident, knowing she's loved and protected." "We did that," Eleanor said wonderingly. "Together, we gave her that." "You gave her that first," Calder corrected. "By refusing to give up, by running when you had to and fighting when you could, by keeping her alive against impossible odds. I just helped finish what you started." Eleanor turned to face him fully, cupping his weathered face in her hands. "No, we did it together. That's what makes it real." She kissed him then, there on the porch steps in full daylight where anyone might see, and didn't care who knew how much she loved this man who'd saved them, and then loved them, and then built a life with them that was more than any of them could have created alone. Over the following weeks, the ranch settled into its late summer rhythms. The cattle were fat and healthy, ready for the fall roundup that would bring the year's primary income. Eleanor's garden was producing abundantly, and she'd begun preserving vegetables and making preserves for the winter, working side by side with Martha Fairfield, who had become a true friend. Mira was growing like a weed, shooting up so fast that Eleanor had to let down the hems on all her dresses twice in as many months. And Eleanor and Calder were building something that went beyond partnership into genuine intimacy, not just physical, though that was growing sweeter and deeper as they learned each other's bodies and hearts, but emotional. They talked late into the night about everything from childhood memories to dreams for the future. They made decisions together about the ranch, about Mira's education, about whether to expand the house or build a proper schoolroom for when Mira got older. They were becoming not just husband and wife, but true partners in every sense of the word. One evening in late September, after Mira had gone to bed, and they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Eleanor felt a flutter in her belly that she'd been noticing for weeks, but had been almost afraid to acknowledge. "Calder," she said quietly, her hand moving instinctively to her stomach. "I need to tell you something." He turned to her immediately, reading something significant in her tone. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm more than all right." Eleanor took his hand and placed it over her belly, over the small swell that was just beginning to be noticeable. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." Calder's face went through a series of expressions so rapidly Eleanor couldn't track them all. Shock, joy, fear, wonder, and finally settling on something that looked like overwhelming emotion. His hand pressed gently against her stomach, as if trying to feel the life growing there. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby." "Yes. I think I'm about 3 months along. I've been pretty sure for a few weeks, but I wanted to wait until I was certain before telling you." Eleanor covered his hand with her own. "Are you happy? I know we didn't plan this, and it's going to change things." "Happy?" Calder's voice cracked. "Eleanor, I don't even have words for what I am. After losing my first wife and child, I never thought I'd get another chance at this. Never thought I'd get to be a father, to hold my own baby, to build this kind of family." He pulled her close, his arms gentle around her. "You've given me everything, more than I ever dreamed possible." Eleanor let herself be held, feeling his heart racing against her cheek, feeling her own heart answer with equal intensity. This baby hadn't been planned, but it was already so wanted, so anticipated, so loved. "Mira's going to be a big sister," she said, smiling at the thought. "She'll be wonderful at it. She'll be bossy and overprotective and probably try to mother the baby constantly," Calder predicted with a laugh. "And she'll be perfect." They told Mira the next morning over breakfast, and the child's reaction was everything they could have hoped for. She squealed with delight, immediately demanding to know if it would be a boy or girl, when it would arrive, if she could help take care of it, and whether it would like horses as much as she did. "We won't know if it's a boy or girl until it's born," Eleanor explained, pulling Mira onto her lap. "But the baby should arrive sometime in March, when spring is just starting. And yes, you can absolutely help take care of your little brother or sister. Being a big sister is an important job." "I'll teach them everything," Mira declared with complete confidence. "How to feed chickens and brush horses and find the best rocks by the creek, and I'll make sure nobody is mean to them ever." Calder caught Eleanor's eye over Mira's head, and they shared a smile full of hope and contentment. This was their family, built from brokenness, forged in adversity, and now growing in ways none of them could have predicted. The news spread quickly through the small ranching community, and they received visits from neighbors bringing gifts and congratulations. Martha Fairfield came with a basket of baby clothes her own children had outgrown and practical advice about pregnancy and childbirth. Tom brought hand-carved wooden toys he'd made for each of his own children. Even the rough ranch hands who worked Calder's land seemed pleased, treating Eleanor with an extra gentleness that would have amused her if it hadn't been so touching. As fall progressed and Eleanor's belly grew more prominent, Calder became almost comically protective. He insisted she not lift anything heavy, not work too long in the garden, not push herself beyond reasonable limits. Eleanor tolerated this fussing with good humor, understanding it came from love and old grief. He'd lost one wife in childbirth, and the fear of losing Eleanor the same way haunted him, even though he tried not to show it. "I'm healthy and strong," she reassured him one evening when he'd caught her carrying a basket of laundry and practically wrestled it away from her. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'll be fine." "I know," Calder said, but his face was tight with worry. "I know that rationally. But Eleanor, I can't lose you. I can't lose either of you. The thought of something going wrong." She took his face in her hands, making him look at her. "Nothing is going to go wrong. We'll have the doctor come from town when my time is near, and Martha will be here to help, and you'll be right outside the door. This baby is going to come into the world healthy and strong, and I'm going to be just fine." "You can't promise that." "No," Eleanor admitted. "I can't promise the future. None of us can. But Calder, I've survived things that should have killed me. I've run across half the country with a sick child, starved for days, faced down men who wanted to destroy me. I'm not going to let childbirth defeat me. I have too much to live for now." Calder pulled her close, carefully mindful of her growing belly, and held her like she was something infinitely precious. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "I know," Eleanor whispered against his chest. "I love you the same way." The fall roundup came and went successfully, bringing in enough profit to expand the herd and make improvements to the ranch that had been waiting for better finances. Calder hired 2 more permanent hands, good men who could be trusted to help run things when the baby came, and he wanted to stay close to the house. He also began building an addition onto the house, a proper nursery with windows facing east to catch the morning sun, and a larger bedroom for Mira since she was getting too big for her small space. Eleanor watched the construction with a heart so full it sometimes felt like it might burst. This was what home looked like, she realized. Not just a roof and walls, but a place that grew and changed to accommodate the family living within it. A place built with care and intention and love. Winter arrived gently, bringing cool rains instead of harsh storms. Eleanor spent the short days preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes, washing and folding blankets that Martha and other neighbor women brought, arranging the nursery that Calder had finished just before Christmas. Mira helped with everything, her excitement building as the baby's arrival grew closer. On Christmas Eve, they had a small celebration, just the three of them plus Tom and Martha Fairfield. They exchanged modest gifts, sang carols with more enthusiasm than skill, and ate a feast that Eleanor and Martha had prepared together. It was simple and warm and full of love, and Eleanor found herself thinking about the previous Christmas, spent hiding in a boarding house in Kansas, terrified and alone with a sick child, barely daring to hope they'd survive to see another holiday. The contrast was so stark, it took her breath away. "What are you thinking about?" Calder asked, finding her standing by the window after their guests had left, looking out at the clear winter night. "Just remembering last Christmas," Eleanor said. "How different everything was. How impossible this—" She gestured around the warm house, toward the bedroom where Mira slept peacefully, to her own rounded belly. Would have seemed. Calder wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands resting on her stomach where the baby was shifting and kicking. "You made it happen. Your courage, your refusal to give up." "We made it happen," Eleanor corrected, as she always did. "I couldn't have done any of this alone." "Maybe not," Calder conceded, "but you were already halfway to salvation when I found you. You'd already fought so hard, survived so much. I just helped with the last bit of the journey." Eleanor turned in his arms, awkward with her belly between them, but not caring. "You did more than help with the last bit. You gave us a home, a family, a future. You gave us everything. And you gave me a reason to build something instead of just existing." Calder's hand cupped her face tenderly. "We saved each other, Eleanor. That's the truth of it." They stood together by the window, watching snow begin to fall in soft, gentle flakes that caught the lamplight and turned to gold. Mira was asleep in her new, larger bedroom, the nursery stood ready and waiting, and the baby inside Eleanor kicked vigorously as if impatient to join the world. Everything was ready. Everything was right. The baby came on a warm day in late March, when the prairie was just beginning to green up after winter, and wildflowers were starting to bloom in scattered patches of color. Eleanor's labor started before dawn, gentle at first but building steadily in intensity as the sun rose. Calder sent one of the hands racing for the doctor and Martha, then stayed by Eleanor's side holding her hand, wiping her forehead, supporting her through each contraction with a steadiness that belied the fear Eleanor could see in his eyes. "I'm all right," she kept telling him between pains. "This is normal. Women do this every day." "I know," he said, but his grip on her hand was almost painfully tight. Martha arrived first, bustling in with the competent authority of a woman who'd delivered 6 children of her own and assisted with countless others. She took one look at Eleanor and nodded with satisfaction. "You're doing fine, dear. This baby's coming just as it should. Everything's progressing perfectly." The doctor arrived an hour later, a kindly older man who confirmed Martha's assessment and settled in to wait. And then it was just time and work. Eleanor's body doing what it was designed to do, pushing this new life into the world with an intensity that was both agonizing and exhilarating. Mira had been sent to stay with Tom Fairfield at their ranch, kept away from the pain and blood and raw reality of birth, but Eleanor could hear her in her mind anyway, could imagine her daughter's excitement and anticipation. That thought sustained her through the hardest parts, through the moments when pain consumed everything, and she wondered if Calder had been right to worry after all. But then, as afternoon light slanted golden through the bedroom window, the baby came, slipping into the world with a lusty cry that announced life and health and perfect normality. The doctor caught the infant competently, and Martha was there immediately with warm blankets. "It's a boy," the doctor announced with a smile. "A healthy, strong boy." Eleanor collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and elated and overwhelmed. A boy. A son. Calder's son. Calder, she managed. Bring Calder. He was there before the words finished leaving her mouth, as if he'd been hovering just outside the door the entire time. His face was pale, his eyes haunted with old fears. But when he saw Eleanor alive and well and smiling, the relief that washed over him was so powerful it seemed to make him taller. You did it, he breathed. You're all right. I told you I would be. Eleanor held out her arms. Come meet your son. Martha placed the baby in Eleanor's arms, and then Calder was beside them both, staring down at the tiny, red-faced infant with an expression of such complete wonder that Eleanor felt tears stream down her face. It's perfect, Calder whispered. He's absolutely perfect. The baby was perfect, small and pink and crying with healthy lungs, his tiny fists waving in the air as if already fighting the world. He had Calder's nose and Eleanor's dark hair, and when he finally stopped crying and opened his eyes, they were deep blue like the prairie sky. What should we name him? Eleanor asked. They discussed names over the winter, but never settled on anything definite, wanting to wait until they saw the baby to decide what fit. Now, holding her son while her husband looked on with unbridled love, Eleanor knew exactly what his name should be. William, she said, for my first husband, who loved Mira so much but never got to see her grow up, and Calder for his middle name, so he carries both fathers with him. Calder's eyes filled with tears. William Calder Boone. It's a strong name. For a strong boy, Eleanor agreed. One who'll grow up knowing he's loved, knowing he's safe, knowing his family will protect him no matter what. The doctor and Martha left eventually, after making sure both Eleanor and the baby were healthy and comfortable. Calder sent word to Tom to bring Mira home, then sat beside the bed, holding Eleanor's hand while she held their son. I was so afraid, he admitted quietly. The whole time, I kept thinking about Sarah, about how I lost her and the baby. I kept imagining the same thing happening to you. But it didn't. Eleanor squeezed his hand. We're both here, both healthy. Your family is complete now, Calder. No more loss, no more grief, just life and love and building our future together. When Mira arrived home, bursting with excitement and questions, they let her climb carefully onto the bed to meet her new brother. She stared at the baby with wide eyes, reaching out one tentative finger to touch his tiny hand. He's so small, she whispered, awed. You were this small once, Eleanor told her. And now look how big you are. He'll grow just like you did. Can I help take care of him? I promised I would. Yes, sweetheart. You can help with everything, holding him when Mama says it's all right, bringing me things I need, singing to him when he cries. Being a big sister is the most important job in the world. Mira beamed with pride, already taking her new responsibilities seriously. She sat beside Eleanor on the bed, one protective hand on the baby's blanket, and looked up at Calder. Are you happy, Papa Calder? Calder's voice was thick with emotion when he answered. Happier than I ever thought possible, little one. I have everything I could ever want right here in this room. They stayed like that as the afternoon light faded to evening, a family complete and whole, bound not just by law or biology, but by choice and love and shared survival. Eleanor looked around at her husband, her daughter, her newborn son, and felt peace settle over her like a blessing. This was what she'd been running toward all along, she realized. Not just away from danger, but toward this, toward home, toward family, toward the possibility of happiness she'd almost stopped believing in. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feeding, of learning to care for a newborn while managing a household and an energetic 5-year-old. But Eleanor had never been happier, exhausted, certainly, overwhelmed at times, but deeply, profoundly content in a way she'd never experienced before. Calder was an involved, devoted father, taking the baby from Eleanor whenever he could so she could rest, walking the floor with William in the middle of the night when the infant fussed, changing diapers with the same calm competence he brought to everything else. Watching him with their son, seeing the tenderness and care he showed, Eleanor fell in love with him all over again. Mira adapted to her role as big sister with enthusiasm, always wanting to help, always checking on the baby, always making sure he had what he needed. She'd found her purpose in protecting and caring for her little brother, and it gave her a confidence and maturity that made Eleanor proud. As spring progressed into summer and William grew from newborn to infant, the ranch prospered. The cattle multiplied, the crops flourished, and Calder's reputation as a fair and skilled rancher continued to spread. They received offers from other ranchers wanting to buy breeding stock, requests for Calder's advice on land management, invitations to become more involved in the growing community's governance. They were becoming established, Eleanor realized, not just surviving, but thriving, building something that would last, something they could pass down to their children and grandchildren. On a warm evening in June, they sat on the porch together, all four of them now, with William sleeping in Eleanor's arms and Mira playing with her dolls at their feet. The setting sun painted the prairie in shades of gold and amber, and the air was sweet with the scent of wildflowers and new grass. "Do you remember the first night we met?" Eleanor asked Calder quietly. "The storm, the broken wagon, how desperate everything was?" "I remember thinking I'd found you too late," Calder said, "that you and Mira were so close to dying that even help might not be enough. And now look at us." Eleanor gestured around at their home, their children, their life. "We made it. Not just survived, but actually built something beautiful." Calder took her free hand, bringing it to his lips. "You know what I think about sometimes? That storm, that broken wagon. What if I'd ridden a different direction that day? What if I hadn't gone out at all? What if I'd found you but turned away?" "But you didn't," Eleanor said softly. "You came. You helped. You gave us bread and shelter, and eventually your name and your love." "Best decision I ever made." Calder's eyes were soft with emotion. "Finding you and Mira, making you my family, it gave me back my life, gave me a reason to build something beyond just existing day to day." Mira looked up from her dolls, listening with the uncanny awareness children sometimes show. "Papa Calder, tell me again about the night you found us." It had become one of her favorite stories, and Calder told it willingly, painting the picture with words. The storm, the broken wagon, Eleanor's courage in protecting her daughter, the decision to bring them home. He told it like a fairy tale, which in some ways it was. A story of desperation and salvation, of strangers becoming family, of love growing in unexpected places. When he finished, Mira climbed into his lap and wrapped her arms around his neck. "I'm glad you found us, Papa. I'm glad you didn't ride a different way." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Eleanor watched them together, watched William sleep peacefully in her arms, watched the sun paint everything gold, and felt a completeness that went beyond words. They'd all been broken in different ways. Her by Jonas's threats and William's death, Calder by war and loss, Mira by fear and instability. But somehow, broken pieces had fitted together to make something whole and strong and beautiful. "I didn't give you a home," Calder said suddenly, turning to Eleanor. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about what we've built here. And I realized you gave me the home. The shelter was already here, the house and land and walls. But you and Mira brought the life, the laughter, the love. You made it a home." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "We gave it to each other," she said, as she always did, as would always be the truth between them. "That's what makes it real, what makes it last. We chose each other every day, and we keep choosing each other. That's what home is." As the sun finally dipped below the horizon and stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, they gathered their children and went inside to the warm house that held all their hopes and dreams. Eleanor put William in his cradle in the nursery, while Calder helped Mira get ready for bed. Then they came together in the main room, Calder banking the fire, while Eleanor made sure everything was ready for the night. Before they went to their own bedroom, Calder pulled Eleanor into his arms and held her close, just breathing together in the quiet house. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair, "for saying yes that first night, for trusting me when you had no reason to, for building this life with me." "Thank you for finding us," Eleanor whispered back, "for being the kind of man who rides out in storms to help strangers, for loving us when we had nothing to offer but trouble." "You offered everything," Calder corrected. "Hope, purpose, family, love. everything that matters. They stood together in the quiet house, two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and built something beautiful from shared struggle and mutual choice. Outside, the Texas night was vast and full of stars, the prairie stretching endlessly in all directions. But inside, everything was warm and safe and complete. Eleanor thought back to that terrible night when she'd been dying beside a broken wagon, hungry and cold and convinced it was the end. She thought about the sound of hooves in the storm, about Calder kneeling in the mud offering bread, about his voice saying, "I've got you." She thought about every choice that had led them here, every moment of courage and trust and hope. "We made it," she said softly, more to herself than to Calder. "We really, truly made it." "Yes," Calder agreed, his arms tightening around her. "We made it. Together." And in that warm house on the Texas prairie, surrounded by the children they'd fought so hard to protect and the love they'd built from desperation and hope, Eleanor finally let go of the last shadows of fear and doubt. The running was over. The fighting was finished. The desperate scramble for survival had transformed into something far greater. A life worth living, a family worth keeping, a home worth cherishing. They'd started with nothing but a loaf of bread shared in a storm. They'd built everything from that single act of kindness. And as they went to bed that night in the house that held their family and their future, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that this was how their story was meant to end. Not with dramatic triumph or fairy tale perfection, but with this: quiet contentment, steady love, and the simple miracle of being home. The widow who'd whispered, "We haven't eaten in 5 days," had become a wife, a mother, a partner in building something that would last. The rancher who'd offered bread had become a husband, a father, the foundation of a family that would carry forward long after both of them were gone. And the little girl who'd been caught between danger and safety had become a daughter twice over, a big sister, a child who knew she was loved and protected and valued beyond measure. They were complete. They were home. They were finally and forever truly safe. And that was everything.